Hey guys, this evening we're travelling back to a time when serving tea was a sacred ceremony, making polite conversation was critical to your very existence, and staying quiet was only acceptable if you were busy doing needlework while sitting impossibly straight. You've landed a job that thankfully has nothing to do with mining coal, performing surgery, or cleaning up after horses. Instead, this position demands a gentle vocal approach, elegant movements, and viewpoints that stay particularly understated. You've accepted the job of a lady's attendant, a compensated perpetual companion for the isolated widow from elevated circles, the anxious young woman making her debut into society, or the mildly controlling baroness who requires somebody to validate her conviction in the superior quality of British jams. Your daily duties consist of reciting selections aloud, playing at the piano, offering confirmation through gentle nods at precisely the proper moments, and absolutely never triumphing at cards unless you've been specifically told to. Before we move forward, please consider tapping that like button and subscribing, but only if you genuinely wish to. Also, feel free to share in the comments where you're watching from and what hour it is for you currently. Dim those lights, turn on that fan for some ambient sound, and let's settle into tonight's small adventure. You arrive at the residence of Lady Eugenia Hawthorne just before afternoon tea begins. Her townhouse holds the aroma of botanical perfume, citrus pastries, and somewhere faintly underneath the fresh scent of lavender wax rubbed onto the wooden banisters. Her manservant remains silent as he accepts your hat, and you resist the urge to curtsy to a nearby console table out of sheer nervousness. Lady Eugenia is already situated there, arranged like a china figurine in a soft ivory chair, so firmly cushioned it might protest if anyone truly tried to recline in it. She's dressed in gentle grey silk, her hair a flawless white creation, and she observes you through spectacles that don't magnify, yet somehow still succeed in evaluating. "Can you handle playing Schubert?" she inquires, without lifting her gaze from her needlework. You confirm with a nod. She motions toward the piano in the corner with a subtle gesture of two fingers, the manner one might direct a hunting dog. The composition is reasonably simple, more gentle than you're accustomed to, and she appears unbothered by any minor mistake you make. Indeed, she appears entirely indifferent. This, you quickly realize, is a core element of the job. You aren't present to impress anyone. You're present to exist agreeably, a breathing, well-trained piece of furniture that understands when to speak and when to disappear into the background. Certain days are filled reading selections aloud. This afternoon, it's the verses of Tennyson. You present the Lady of Shalott with all the melancholy elegance you can muster, while she sips her tea and occasionally releases a disapproving sound. At one point, she interrupts, mentioning, "There's no need to sound so weighed down with sorrow, dear. It's simply poetry." Then she yawns. You learn that her departed husband, Major Hawthorne, preferred his cigars imported and his dogs properly disciplined. She mentions him daily, usually with an inflection that shifts between authentic sorrow and private contentment. You nod at the appropriate times and smile when she mocks his footwear. The most valued period of the day is the window hour, between 4 and 5, when she takes her nap, and you're granted permission to sit quietly by the window with your own thoughts and a book she'll never ask you about. You always choose something slightly beneath your true reading level, just to be cautious if she questions. You're offered one pastry with jam, no butter, and never a second helping unless she willingly provides it. And yet, there's a curiously calming quietness in the routine of this work. The expectation for moderation, the silence padded by the floral printed furniture, the sound of lightly polished shoes on plush carpeting. What you aren't supposed to understand, but naturally you do, is that some companions were previously noble daughters themselves, their families having lost their fortune due to a poor investment or a scandal involving canned seafood from overseas. It's a respectable form of exile. Lady Eugenia never asks about your past, which functions as both a kindness and a clear instruction not to mention it. You aren't a servant, nor are you family. You're an unusual in-between, a ghost with a regular income. Still, it surpasses being a governess. At least nobody requires you teach Latin or discipline children using sticks. Besides, there are worse fates in Victorian England than getting compensated to play music and respond with, "Yes, Lady Eugenia, I completely agree." The hardest part? Occasionally she offers you a slight smile and you feel as though you've properly passed a test you didn't realise you were taking. The days settle into a calculated, scented rhythm, mornings with the newspapers delivered still damp with the early fog, and afternoons filled with literature that must never be too controversial, too unusual, or too French. You quickly discover that even your reading voice counts. One slip into a provincial accent, and Lady Eugenia's eyebrow rises like the Tower Bridge mid-lift. You maintain a voice that's neutral, polite, and not excessively animated. A lady's companion must never eclipse her mistress. Occasionally she has visitors, other widows, retired military officers, a distant cousin who smells faintly of mothballs and defeat. During these moments, your role is to smoothly fade into the background with grace. You pour the tea, you offer the cookies, and when they discuss the latest war or the Queen's health or the price of imported French wallpaper, you nod without supporting any particular stance. You aren't completely invisible, but you're not meant to draw attention. Naturally, not every lady's companion finds the work so easy. You've heard tales at the lending library. Some companions must share bedrooms with their mistresses. Some are given the task of mending stockings or managing grown children who failed at matrimony. One woman was allegedly required to play the harp every evening while her mistress conducted séances in the parlour. You, at least, only have to tolerate the occasional poem about country hedgerows. The pay is modest, barely enough for purchasing new gloves each season, but it includes lodging, food, and the respectability of being able to say you have a legitimate profession in a world where an unmarried woman of a certain age could easily fall into ruin just by existing. That's a substantial benefit. You once dreamed of becoming a teacher or a writer or secretly a theatre actress, but such professions are filled with social risk, unless your uncle sits in Parliament or your father operates a commercial distillery. Being a companion is the middle path, the protected one, respectable, unassuming, bearable. Every Thursday is dedicated to needlework. Lady Eugenia labours on an embroidery pattern. You pretend working on the same floral sample for 6 months. She doesn't notice, or if she does, she approves your strategic laziness. Sometimes when she's napping in her chair and you look up at the clock ticking on the shelf, you wonder who will serve as your companion when you become elderly. You imagine a younger woman nodding courteously as you complain about modern literature and how nobody prepares tea properly anymore. But that's far ahead, for now. You rise when the clock strikes 5 and quietly gather your things. You say, "Good evening, Lady Eugenia," and she replies with a simple, "Yes, yes." You may leave, as if she just noticed your existence at all. Outside, the gaslights begin to illuminate the street. You pass a young chimney sweep with ash on his face, a butcher's apprentice expertly carrying organ meat wrapped in paper, and 2 policemen too engaged in conversation to notice the pickpocket quickly slipping past. You walk home in flat shoes and silence, breathing the mixed scents of coal smoke, horse droppings, and the fragrance of autumn leaves. The streets are alive again, full of noise and movement and everything your workday lacks, and for a brief moment just before you reach the boarding house, you catch yourself smiling, because while the rest of the world turns in filth and chaos, you've carved out your own quiet corner, a paid shadow, a necessary listener, an accepted fixture, a lady's companion. And in Victorian England that represents more freedom than most ever achieve. The sign mounted outside the narrow brick building reads Dr. Archibald Fenwick, phrenologist, character revealed through the cranium in peeling gold letters. You stand facing it with your gloves clutched nervously under one arm, wondering how many ridiculous declarations you'll need to make today to collect your pay. Then you recall you aren't the one being examined, you're the assistant, or, depending on the client, the acknowledged expert. The Victorian public has an unusual hunger for definite answers about personality, destiny, and mental capacity, and phrenology helpfully provides exactly that, all packaged up nicely in a polished ivory replica of the human skull with tidy sections labelled for traits like amativeness, determination, and prudence. It's like mapping virtue. You step inside and are immediately greeted by the distinctive smells of chalk powder, pipe smoke, and lemon wood polish. The examination room is filled with glass jars, actual skulls, yes, but also teaching models, diagrams, and even a shelf containing plaster moulds taken from supposedly notable men. You've been told one came from a high-ranking priest and another, whispered quietly, from a condemned criminal. You've learned the vocabulary. When a nervous young man inquires if he's suited for a position in finance, you carefully run your fingers along the bump just above his ear and whisper, "Well-formed acquisitiveness, sir." He smiles. Obviously he's meant for banking. When a mother comes with her little daughter, bright-eyed, hair neatly styled, behaviour overly coached, you find the slightest bumps and declare, "Strong sense of organisation and compassion, perfect for motherhood or piano performance." The mother nods, pleased and reassured. You never give negative assessments. That's Dr. Fenwick's job, if necessary. He once informed a butcher that he displayed moral weakness and shouldn't be trusted alone with young female employees. That particular client didn't return. You try to guide the readings kindly. After all, most people simply want confirmation. They want to hear they're naturally good or special, or that their life choices are justified. The real skill is in reading the person's character, not the skull shape. Still, there are genuine believers. Some carry small skull charts in their vest pockets. One old gentleman comes with his own phrenology measuring tools and insists to double-check your calculations. You allow him proceed. Then you quietly adjust his reading to match the life he's already lived. It isn't exactly lying, but rather carefully guided interpretation. You've perfected keeping a straight face during the stranger requests. One man questioned if the bumps on his skull indicated he had the potential to be a writer. Another wanted to discover if he should propose for marriage. A woman once wondered, blushing deeply, if phrenology could determine whether her husband's passion had diminished due to his eating habits or a character flaw. Dr. Fenwick handled that one himself with a surprisingly extended discussion regarding the consumption of melons at public talks. You're the one who retrieves the skulls, organises the charts, and sometimes volunteers to have your own head examined. You practice the amazed yet delighted reaction when the doctor proclaims your exceptional ideality. It's a performance, certainly, but so is much of the popular science of the era. And the Victorians, they adore a performance dressed up as logical analysis. Your favourite task of the day is cleaning the ivory skulls in the back room. There's one shaped like a youngster's head, labelled with inked labels that are starting to fade. Destructiveness, hope, secretiveness. You gently wipe the grooves with a rag and wonder what sort of person that head once belonged to, if anyone at all. You suspect some of the models are complete inventions. But it doesn't truly matter, because in this business, as in many others, the facts are often less significant than the presentation. There are moments, quiet, absurd moments, when you almost believe in it. Like when a well-groomed widow enters, convinced that her second spouse was prone to infidelity because of an unusual bump on the back of his skull. She places a small bronze replica on the table, supposedly cast from his actual head. You can't tell if it's genuine or if she commissioned it after the funeral out of pure Victorian love for the dramatic. Either way, you nod seriously and touch the specific spot in question, murmuring indeed a prominent amativeness combined with weak conscientiousness. It may have expressed itself unpredictably. She gasps sharply, as if you've summoned his actual ghost. Of course, phrenology has its critics. A few newspapers dismiss it as simple trickery, and serious medical doctors, those working in hospitals deeply involved in real anatomy, tend to mock it. But that's largely irrelevant to Dr. Fenwick's clients. They aren't seeking a medical opinion, they're seeking confirmation of identity. And in a society where people are judged by their class, wealth, and clothing, the notion that one's skull might reveal a deeper truth is fascinating. Sometimes Dr. Fenwick conducts private sessions for elegant social gatherings. You're instructed to dress perfectly, hold the shiny calipers, and address everyone as madam or sir, even if they constantly call you boy or girl. In these formal lounges, surrounded by silk and various hors d'oeuvres, you delicately measure the bumps on the heads of society's most bored and worried people. The oddest request comes from a couple who want their baby's head evaluated for signs of brilliance. The infant is 5 months old, bald, and completely unaffected by your presence. You gently touch the delicate crown and mention something about early awareness. The mother begins crying tears of joy. The father gives you a coin as a tip. The baby releases a loud burp. There's a shelf in the storage area stacked with outdated phrenology books with personal notes written in the margins and passages underlined about the connection between skull structure and moral character. Some of the content makes you uncomfortable, especially the sections that claim certain ethnic groups have inferior mental capabilities. You never reference those parts when clients are present. Dr. Fenwick seems not to care. You suspect that's precisely why he hires you, not because you believe the science, but because you can deliver the results gracefully. You've learned how to navigate the space between what phrenology technically claims and what people want it to mean. You tell the baker that he has the hands of a true craftsman. You inform the schoolteacher she possesses a highly developed sense of kindness. You once told a man with a frightening glare that he had a hidden sense of humour. He laughed for the first time in what seemed like years. And you've never had your own head analysed. You consider it sometimes, but maybe it's wiser not to find out, or better yet, to just pretend like you know. You can always claim your reverence region is unusually prominent, or your secretiveness region is remarkably minimal. Thus, your natural honesty. At the end of each shift, you dust the plaster heads, organise the brochures, and wonder how long the public's fascination in skull reading will last. But for now, it pays the bills, and in Victorian England, that's enough to make faith an optional thing. You walk out onto the gaslit street carrying a notebook under your arm and adjusting your gloves. Nobody knows your real opinions, not even your skull. The small back room has a faint smell of bird, not the pleasant singing kind, but the stale, dusty, somewhat pungent smell of feathers long separated from their original owners. You sneeze once more. You're seated at your small work area, which isn't really a bench but the edge of a converted dining table covered with spools of thread, small pieces of twine, wire frames, and a bird's nest-like pile of colourful plumes. Welcome to your latest occupation, feather duster manufacturing. It's more legitimate than it sounds. At least, that's what you keep reminding yourself. Feather dusters are essential instruments in every properly maintained Victorian home, especially those with tall ceilings and elaborate chandeliers. Every skilled housemaid uses one to sweep away coal dust, spider webs, and the faint suggestion of poverty, and someone has to be responsible for making them. You began your training under a Mrs. Godfrey, a stern woman with stiff leather shoes and hands like chicken bones. She can identify every feather just by touch. Goose for a soft touch, ostrich for visual drama, rooster for needed strength, and peacock when the customer wants to feel luxurious. You discover immediately that swan feathers are strictly prohibited, she cautions, unless you're willing to handle furious complaints from customers who actually pay. The task itself demands precision. You start by organising feathers based on their dimensions and colouring. Some still carry fragments of their original source, forcing you to methodically clean them completely. No purchaser wants a duster dragging fuzzy bits or suggestions of, well, where it came from. Following that comes construction, selecting the precise quantity of interior, central and exterior plumes to achieve the correct thickness. The best dusters feel dense and sumptuous, their spines secured with almost invisible thread completed with black velvet covering on the handle. A tiny brass cap finishes the grip, sometimes engraved if the purchaser has especially sophisticated preferences. These superior items go to stylish districts, or government workers, or some aristocratic woman who maintains a pet monkey and hires a footman. Your initial efforts wind up in servants' quarters, but you're progressing consistently. Your hands smell of starch, adhesive, and furniture polish. Your fingernails hold constant traces of dust, and you've acquired an uncommon sensitivity to feather textures. You can now determine if one has cracked simply by how it moves across your palm. The work provides serenity. No screaming customers, no managers observing perpetually. Just periodic checks from Mrs. Godfrey, who examines your collections like a predator inspecting a nest, either approving silently or destroying everything with one quick motion. Begin again. The left section feels heavier than the right. Still, there's authentic joy in accomplishing perfect equilibrium, observing goose plumes naturally curve, sensing how rooster shafts offer slightly stronger resistance against the string. There's something profoundly gratifying in transforming scattered fluff into organised elegance. You once inquired with Mrs. Godfrey about her professional journey. She paused, wrapping her wire, blinked intentionally, and clarified that her mother manufactured decorative umbrellas. She merely converted the leftover materials into cleaning implements. The brushes generated better earnings. It wasn't exactly the inspiring story you'd expected, but it was truthful. Multiple times each week a messenger boy from the adjacent hat shop comes to exchange feathers. He constantly carries traces of fragrance and starch. Once he suggested trading a collection of midnight black ostrich plumes for 3 sturdy turkey wing quills. You negotiated skillfully. You succeeded. The duster you created from those plumes sold the next day. Mrs. Godfrey provided no reaction, but she permitted you to use the front workspace that evening, closer to the window, closer to respectability. When your fingers hurt from tying, you shift to the completion stage. Each duster gets final shaping, trimming stray fibres, evening the edges, so the finished product appears intentional, uniform, and refined, as though it naturally grew that way on some impossibly symmetrical bird. You've created a personal routine. Tap the base twice, rotate it once, trim in a circular motion. This way, regardless of whether the morning delivered absolute chaos, tangled chicken plumes, a delivery of turkey feathers smelling suspiciously of yesterday's broth, you keep one section of your life in complete control. Sometimes wealthy women enter the shop directly. They call you girl despite your 25 years, asking things like, "Do you carry anything in purple ostrich?" Or "Will this particular shade match with the drawing room's pale blue furnishings?" One patron actually brought fabric samples to confirm coordinating colours. You held up a bundle of light violet goose feathers and she responded, satisfactory, before completing payment with a small ivory-handled cane and departing. No appreciation voiced, no farewell given, but it marked your first independent sale. Far different from the servants' quarters, you kept the paper receipt in your pocket for 7 days before eventually discarding it. The shop itself lacks sophistication. A narrow display window, a hand-painted sign reading simply "Featherwares" in fading lettering. But enter inside and it transforms into a haven of refinement. Ceiling hooks decorated with sample dusters, bunches of plumes hanging like botanical arrangements, containers of organised feathers bound with coarse twine. It's quieter than the fabric mills, warmer than the blacksmith, and significantly more agreeable than the glue factory down the street, where you once witnessed a worker's boot slowly dissolving into the floor. You've lately started experimenting. A miniature duster built entirely from pheasant plumes, another displaying a decorated handle made from twisted silk cord. Mrs. Godfrey raises one questioning eyebrow at your creative touches, but she hasn't stopped them. Not yet. One afternoon, a gentleman with groomed hands and a soft demeanour arrives asking for a duster as a gift, something unique, something refined. You show him your pheasant creation and he smiles. "I'll purchase it," he announces. "My sister truly loves cleaning." That may or may not be accurate, but he leaves a silver coin, heavier than anticipated. This one you discreetly save, just in case. And then come the more peculiar customers. One duster, made from crimson-tipped rooster plumes, gets bought by a stage magician. He claims he uses it to disperse smoke. Another ships by mail to a theatre in Manchester intended for a burlesque performer called Lulu La Plume. You don't ask questions, but you certainly smile broader while packaging that order. You slowly realise that your creations travel to places you'll never visit. You imagine your dusters gently cleaning marble shelves, theatre curtains, velvet footstools, and the occasional forbidden space. It's strangely reassuring because although your identity remains unknown, your craftsmanship moves through life like a whisper. Gentle, elegant, essential. And someday, years later, some other young woman might hold one of your dusters and feel, even momentarily, that the world contains kindness. Even in Victorian Britain, the first lesson you learn is never to underestimate a saturated wool coat, especially when it's hanging across your shoulders, still wet from 7 days of drizzle, and you're expected to hoist it onto the wooden roller without drenching the other clean items. You are presently a mangle worker, a living lever, a human pulley system, a domestic technician with forearms resembling woven rope. It's not glamorous, and it's certainly not hygienic, but the pay beats scrubbing floors, and you're not required to make pleasant conversation during work. The mangle machine itself is massive, an intimidating structure of cast iron and wood. It looks capable of flattening a wagon wheel if properly motivated. 2 huge rollers sit in parallel, operated by a substantial hand crank. Your job is feeding soaking wet linens, shirts, undergarments, petticoats, and whatever the week's washing brought through the rollers smoothly, without wrinkles, without bunching, and without catching your fingers. There's a specific rhythm to it. Lift, feed, crank, pull. The crank weighs more than it looks, and the rollers make a faint squeal, always slightly off-key, right before they grab a stubborn edge of heavy flannel. Your workplace is a communal laundry facility situated behind a row of workers' houses. It's warm from the boiler in winter, humid in summer, and always filled with conversation. Most of the other mangle workers are older than you, some are widows. A few are simply quiet people who prefer forcibly removing water from cloth to making trouble. Every Monday brings pandemonium. Laundry arrives in huge, heavy baskets, smelling of soap, ash, and human life. You take whatever gets handed over, inspect it for forgotten pins, and begin cranking. Tuesday brings respite. That's when you rerun the items that got folded while wet or pressed carelessly. The woman 2 stations down once attempted mangling a waterproofed canvas apron and nearly broke the handle. You've never allowed her to forget that incident. There's satisfaction in doing the job correctly. You can identify a skilled mangle worker by her posture, feet apart, shoulders relaxed, body angle just right. It's a deliberate dance with machinery, and if you're good, the clothes emerge flatter than a nobleman's polished lie. A proper pressing means less ironing for the girls at the board, fewer complaints from those who pay us, and, if fortune allows, a few pennies tucked in the pockets of next week's fresh batch. Sometimes the things delivered are peculiar. A corset of fine lace stained heavily with red wine, a cotton handkerchief bearing initials that don't match the accompanying list. You recall destroying silk trousers once, fabric so delicate it nearly floated straight through the rollers. You remained silent. Everyone remained silent. The laundry room held its collective breath, then released a wave of nervous laughter. But the labour is punishing. Your back stiffens before the midday bell. Your knuckles start swelling visibly by Friday's end. The skin on your hands becomes thick, scarred, and often carries the faint, acrid smell of harsh lye. Yet the power is yours. Your brute strength, your tempo, the turning of your own lever, and in a city where women are often reduced to ornament or total dependence, being needed for physical strength feels oddly liberating. Though your name will never be sewn into any fine garment, your work is there. They feel it, pressed flat into every collar, every sheet, every crisp crease. By Wednesday, a specific throbbing pain develops in your muscles that reads as both penalty and accomplishment. The constant ache proves you've survived this far into the week. It also signals that 2 more full days remain before you can finally rest in silence without the phantom turning of the rollers echoing in your mind. The mangle machine naturally has its own temperament. Yours leans noticeably to the left. The handle will jam if you pause too long between strong turns. It makes a low groan on days when the air is heavy with moisture. And once, just once, it shot a gentleman's dress pants with such unexpected force that they landed perfectly in someone's lunch stew in the yard outside. Mrs. Callahan never let you forget that episode. You've grown fiercely defensive of your machine. When the foreman suggests oiling the iron rollers, you whisper a caution, not too much, under your breath. Too much oil and the fine fabrics slide wrong, too little, and your shoulder will pop out painfully again, just like last spring. The other women have their routines. Rosie sings old hymns to keep her rhythm. Agatha speaks to the mangle as though it were her absent third husband. Unreliable, loud, but dependable enough when properly treated. Someone even carved a crude, simple face into the wooden handle years ago. 2 small circular eyes and 1 straight line mouth. You've worn the carving smooth with all the years of constant gripping. Sometimes you dream about being replaced entirely. Not your body, but your actual role. Maybe a huge steam-powered press. Completely automated, incredibly efficient, perfectly silent. Newspapers discuss these inventions in the grand laundries of the upper class. But here, within the working-class neighbourhoods of Camden, nothing can truly replace the sheer force of the human turning arm. Not yet, anyway. In your most profitable weeks, your earnings allow small luxuries. A new thin strip of red ribbon, a ceramic jar of rose-scented cream, a second-hand paperback book with worn pages. You read by dim candlelight, your forearms resting on the cold stone of the windowsill. You've also developed the ability to spot your work out in the world. At Sunday service, when the preacher's long white robe looks especially crisp and smooth, you gently nudge the woman next to you and murmur, "That one is mine." When you pass the neighbourhood baker's wife and notice her apron lying perfectly flat against her stomach, a small surge of quiet pride rises within you. Nobody ever praises a perfectly pressed sheet, yet it exists, quietly maintaining the overall illusion of proper civilization. Pressed cloth, perfect stitching, the inherent dignity of cleanliness, all relying on the constant quiet turning of your own 2 hands. Your mother always said that to fold laundry was, essentially, to fold dignity. Only now do you fully grasp her meaning. And then there are the secret stories that arrive hidden within the week's wash. You find handwritten notes stitched into waistbands, mysterious coded letters, initials embroidered over a tiny fragment of poetry tucked deliberately inside a treasured blouse. And once, almost unbelievably, a delicate pressed violet flower between 2 thick petticoats, its natural colour barely faded. You never ask questions, but you always remember the details. And so you continue cranking the heavy handle, not for praise, not for recognition, but because somewhere in this city a person will wear a freshly pressed collar tomorrow morning, confidently step into their life and feel slightly more complete, never knowing that it was you who made it possible. In this wet city of gas fumes, black coal soot and constant human sweat, you are the invisible keeper of clean lines. And the world, despite its chaos, desperately needs clean lines. The air inside the workshop is dense with rising steam and the faint, familiar smell of singed animal hair. Nearby, a large kettle begins to whistle sharply. Elsewhere, someone curses loudly as a burst of hot vapour releases too quickly and burns an exposed hand. You stand at a huge wooden table in a cramped space that resembles more a steam bath than a design studio, surrounded by overflowing shelves packed with raw felt, straw bases, silk ribbons, and rounded wooden shapes. Today, like every other day, you are the designated hat blocker. If a hat represents the essential crown of the respectable Victorian gentleman, then you are the one who ensures that this crown never sags, tilts awkwardly, or makes its owner resemble a melted, shapeless cheese. Your tools are simple, but carry a sense of immense history. A large kettle, a padded hammer, smooth wooden blocks shaped for every conceivable head, a long fabric measuring tape, a pair of leather gloves, thick calloused hands, and the endless patience of a religious devotee. The procedure must always start with steam, nothing but steam. You hold the raw, completely shapeless felt material directly over the kettle's spout until it surrenders into total submission. It becomes utterly limp, like wet bread dough. That is the critical moment. You must grab it quickly but evenly over the appropriate wooden block that matches with the customer's head measurement and chosen style. Top hat solid bowler, the classic Homburg, or perhaps the unusual angled trilby. You pull the fabric tight, like skin stretched over bone. You tap it gently into the required shape. Then you fix it with pins, bind it securely, and let it dry fully, slowly hardening into its final, predetermined character. You have seen at least 1,000 hats pass through your working hands, yet no two ever look exactly identical. Some tilt forward, looking aggressive, others slope backward, holding a faint suggestion of mischief. The hat constitutes the last critical mask a man wears before confronting the outside world, and you are its silent, invisible craftsman. You once shaped a hat for a politician whose head was so perfectly round that you had to measure it twice to be absolutely certain. Another time, an ambitious young actor requested a top hat that contained a slight trace of danger. You gave the hat's brim a very subtle forward angle. He gave you a free ticket to his next theatrical performance. Then there was the peculiar gentleman who firmly insisted his hat needed being just a tiny bit taller than his known rivals. You added that exact half-inch and never disclosed your method. Some days, you are merely trusted with the important responsibility of restoration rather than the original shaping. That is when the real challenges appear. How does one effectively fix a crush-damaged hat from a careless drunken opera exit? How do you manage to rescue a solid bowler left carelessly too close to an open fire? You smooth out the deep creases, carefully repair the damaged inner lining, vigorously polish the outer band, and return it looking better than it ever looked when new. There is an unusual, quiet satisfaction in staying invisible in this profession. If your work is truly excellent, nobody ever notices. The hat simply fits perfectly. It merges into the wearer's silhouette, his confident stride, his essential social armour. But oh, when the work is done poorly. You've heard the cautionary tales. One mistake in blocking and a man's entire reputation is changed. Too short a hat crown and he is immediately mocked as a backward country farmer. Too wide a brim and he is permanently labelled as flashy or vulgar. You carry that serious burden every time you reach for the steaming kettle. Your work apron is now permanently stained with human sweat and black dye. The skin on your thumbs is exceptionally thick from constant pinning, but your trained eye remains sharp. You can spot a stranger across a crowded street and instantly determine his head size, his preferred style and, if you dare to be bold, his exact marital status, purely from the general condition of his hat. It is far more than simple millinery. It is silent storytelling, and by the middle of the week you are masterful in it. Your hands remember the shape of every single block they have touched. Smooth domes of cedar, sharply defined brims, and the rare custom shape featuring an unusual bump near the ear, possibly from an old injury, a childhood falling accident, or a lifetime wearing hats that were far too tight. You have learned to preserve these details, though not written on paper. You remember the man with the sour breath and the silk gloves who desperately needed a hat that would suggest authority but never aggressively demand. You gave him a bowler that had a very firm crease and a brim that was just short of looking arrogant. You remember the theatre director whose top hat was unfortunately dented at the crown because he stored it beneath a leaking overhead pipe. You carefully repaired it twice before realising he actually preferred the imperfection, calling it deliberate distress. And then there is the one you know you will never forget. A tall, very soft-spoken gentleman who came with a thoroughly ruined straw boater and an official-looking letter folded into his coat pocket. He spoke very little, but you immediately sensed the hat had belonged to someone else, someone now completely absent. You did not ask a single question. You simply reshaped the straw anew, gently smoothing the brim, steaming it softly and wrapping the outer band in respectful black cloth. He paid you in total silence, left with only a brief, polite nod. There are deeply private stories tucked into every sweatband, every hat that is shaped within this room and has a purpose to serve. Weddings, long funerals, job promotions, secret meetings, formal disputes, society introductions, permanent departures. You never actually see what final outcome happens afterward. You simply send the hat forward like a firmly sealed letter and trust the intended message is properly received. You shape felt and steam into something that makes sense on somebody's skull. Half the requests sound impossible from the start. Make me look respectable but not boring. Or, I want a hat that convinces people I've always belonged here even when I don't say anything. You translate these strange demands the best you can. A slight tilt here, a crisper fold in the material, a grey that runs just a shade darker. You figured out early that men struggle to put their desires into words, but they recognise exactly what they want the second they see it perched on their own head. The mirror never lies. There's always that single perfect instant, the subtle lift of the chin, the quick touch to the brim, the quiet breath of total satisfaction when they catch their reflection and completely buy into the story you've constructed from nothing but felt and hot steam. It doesn't happen every time, but when it does, it feels exactly like applause. You've crafted hats for influential judges, local bartenders, weathered sailors and nervous schoolboys, for secret lovers trying to impress someone, for criminals attempting to appear respectable, for men who want to disappear entirely, and for others who need to be unforgettable. Nobody remembers you naturally, but sometimes, when you're walking through the streets and you notice a particular hat that sits perfectly, shaped with precision, exact, and self-assured, you can't help smiling just slightly. That specific hat came from your workshop, and even though your actual name isn't sewn into the lining, your particular quiet influence persists, enduring in a city that only values what's visible on the surface. You create the essential crown they wear, and yet nobody thinks to acknowledge the steady hand working invisibly behind the fabric. You start every single evening with a tall ladder, a controlled flame, and a desperate race against approaching darkness. The gas lamps won't wait for you. The instant the sun finally drops behind the jagged chimney-stack rooftops of London, the entire city begins dissolving into thick soot and spreading shadow. That's your cue to move. You grab the long pole, wrap your scarf tight, and start your familiar route. You're a humble lamplighter, not the kind who works inside elegant hotel lobbies with polished brass buttons and a rehearsed smile. No, you're outside on the cold, harsh streets, cobbled, usually wet, and frequently quietly threatening. Your job sounds deceptively simple, to manually light each of the city's countless gas lamps before complete night arrives, then come back again at first light of morning to carefully extinguish them. Simple until it rapidly stops being that. Each gas lamp is precariously positioned on top of a tall iron post roughly 10 feet off the ground. You carry a pole that has a small, controlled flame at the very tip, fueled by lamp oil and sheer determination, and you use it to reach upward, trigger the small lever, and ignite the gas mantle with a burst of fire. It flares gently immediately, a warm, pulsing blue circle expanding inside the glass globe. Then you need to move fast. There are endless lamps to light before the world goes completely dark. You walk incredibly quickly. The route is an unchangeable pattern. Baker Street, around Langham Place, all the way down toward the damp riverside fog. You know every crack in the paving stones intimately, every place where the footing shifts beneath your boots, every single shortcut through the narrow alleys and hidden mews. The lamps themselves seem to have their own distinct personalities. Some light up instantly in perfect cooperation. Others hiss, sputter, requiring a second careful attempt. There's one particular lamp on Broadwick Street that always flares way too bright and once nearly burned off your eyebrow. You quietly call that one the dragon. Sometimes children follow behind you, matching your stride, pretending their walking sticks are also burning torches. You let them, unless they get too close to your feet. Not every encounter is pleasant. Loud drunks sometimes yell. A few street troublemakers once tried to steal your pole to set a tavern sign on fire. You managed to retrieve it. Eventually they ran off, laughing in the dark, and you silently cursed them with every breath. Your grandmother used to curse at the chickens. Still, most people never even notice you at all. You provide light for their path, yet they never see your face. Occasionally, you pause just a moment longer at the lamps on the corner, looking down at the street below. The glow of the gaslight softens everything. The dirt looks like gold, the smoke seems lighter. Couples walk closer together and a lady fixes her hatpin using the reflected shine. You're the unstated beginning to every evening in the city. One time on a cloudless night you watched a gentleman propose under your lamplight. She said yes. They kissed. Then he looked up and gave you a brief acknowledgement. You returned the gesture. But no, that didn't happen. Every night brings its own challenge. Rain makes the iron steps slippery. Fog makes it harder to locate the lamps. Wind tries to extinguish your tiny flame before it can light the gas. On terrible nights, you wake up soaked, bruised, and covered in soot streaks, your arms trembling from holding the long pole too high for too long. But the city is safer, warmer, and more alive when all the lights are burning. And knowing you accomplished that quietly, with no applause, is all you need. Dawn arrives before the sun actually appears. You're already awake, your scarf damp with dew, your boots still wet from the night before. The street is a faint grey as fog wraps around the buildings, shop owners yawn as they unlock their doors, and a cat chases something invisible beneath a cart. Now begins the second phase of your job. Extinguishing the lights. You retrace the same route backward, holding the same pole, but instead of carrying fire, now you bring darkness. You raise the hooked end of your tool, press the small lever that cuts off the gas flow, and watch each lamp flicker and die one by one. The city sighs in its sleep as you extinguish the borrowed stars of the night. There's a quiet rhythm to this process, a sense of stillness. Last night you brought warmth and visibility. This morning you gently return the city to the daylight, one flame at a time. And yet, despite having done this for years, you still notice the unique beauty of it all. The way a gaslight goes out like a silent breath. How the pigeons don't stir until the fourth lamp on Great Marlborough Street is extinguished. How chimney smoke just begins to drift upward as you reach the halfway point. One morning, you find someone standing beneath a lamp. A young man clutching a leather satchel, nervously checking his pocket watch. "First day at the bank," he whispers, not really speaking to you. You nod, extinguish the flame and say, "Good light," speaking to yourself. He looks surprised, smiles, and then disappears into the mist. You sometimes wonder if the lamps remember you. Probably not. But there are marks, small scratches on the poles left by your hook, the subtle layer of soot on your gloves that only you can distinguish from week to week. This is your hidden mark across the city, your signature. Of course, technology advances for everyone. There's talk of electric lights now, arcs of current, metal filaments, and glass bulbs. Some streets have already been converted. Your friend Thomas, who used to cover the east side, lost his entire area when they installed the new wiring. Now he sells matches from a box on Oxford Street. You haven't said it out loud, but you understand? One day your ladder will stay in the corner, your pole will collect dust, and the lamps will shine without your effort. But for today, this morning, you're still needed. You turn the last corner, reach the final lamp, and lift your pole one last time. The small flame inside trembles once, as if knowing the day has arrived. Then it disappears. The silence is profound. You lower the pole, rest it against your shoulder, and in the stillness between extinguishing the lights and the waking world, you absorb the quiet, strange dignity of your labour. Not every job allows you to push back the darkness, but yours does. Twice each day. It's not even dawn yet, but you're already moving through narrow passageways where the cobblestones are still damp from the night's moisture. Past houses where curtains shift with the breath of sleepers who depend on you more than they realise. In one hand you carry a long, thin stick. In the other, a pocket watch ticking like a steady heartbeat. You're a knocker-up, and your purpose is to wake the town. Not with ringing alarms, not with crowing roosters, and definitely not with clocks. Those are expensive, unreliable things reserved for financiers and lawyers. No, you wake people in the traditional way with a gentle tap on the window glass. Or, if you want to be playful, a pea shooter aimed directly at the pane. You carry a mental list of locations, names and times. Mr. Collings at 4:45 in the morning exactly for his shift at the metalworks. The Stevens twins at 5:10 for the bakery. Mrs. Kettering at 5:55 because she needs exactly 15 minutes to fasten her boots. No more, no less. You approach each building like a ghost. Lift your pole and tap, tap, tap at the third-floor window just under the left shutter. Sometimes they wave, sometimes they grumble. One time, Mr. Collings went back to sleep and blamed you for his tardiness. You tapped twice as hard the next day, louder. It's a quiet job and surprisingly delicate. Too soft and they'll sleep through it. Too loud and you risk waking the infant, or worse, the landlord. Some windows have tricky spots that don't carry sound well. Others are blocked by thick drapes. One woman installed lace so heavy you had to resort to tapping the drain pipe instead. And the pea shooter. It's not a toy. It's a strategic instrument. You learned that after the family on the 7th floor moved in on Pudding Lane. No ladder in the world could reach that high. So now you carry a small bag of dried peas. Clean, reusable, and surprisingly effective. You've developed an excellent aim. Your job makes you invisible during the daytime. No one notices you by noon. They simply forget. They assume they woke naturally, by habit or coincidence or some inner sense of duty. But it was you. It has always been you. Once a man tried to invent a system of ropes and pulleys to replace your service. It became tangled. A cat got stuck in the mechanism. You were back on the route the very next morning. Your footwear wears out faster than anything else you own. The soles become thin from the constant miles. You tried wearing boots once, but they made too much noise on the stone streets. Now you wear soft-soled shoes and carry a pencil to write down any new requests. Knock on the frame, not the glass. Or add 5 minutes on Fridays. It's not glamorous, but it's important. Because you're not just waking people up. You're fulfilling commitments. Commitments to pastry chefs, butchers, clerks, and chimney sweeps. Commitments whispered in exhausted voices the night before. Get me up no matter what, and you do. Your route winds through a significant part of the early morning world. You know which homes creak before their occupants do, which windows fog up from kettles just starting to heat, and which doors will open exactly 3 seconds after your knock, as if they were expecting it in their sleep. You never stop. never exchange small talk. That's not part of the deal. A proper knocker-up is a subtle sound, not a lengthy conversation. Still, there are exceptions, like the young trainee on Barley Row who leaves you a baked good on Tuesdays, always wrapped in paper, always still warm. He never says a word, but the biscuit always has one raisin, like a personal signature. Or the coal delivery man who once invited you in for tea during a snowstorm. His hands were black up to his elbows and the tea was strong enough to wake the dead, but it warmed your body and your sense of purpose. Then there's the couple in the corner building, the retired pair. They have no jobs to attend, but every morning, just before 6, you tap their window anyway. And every morning the curtain moves and a hand waves. Out of habit, out of gratitude, out of something deeper than alarm clocks. The city has a distinct pulse at this hour. Market wagons roll into position, glass milk bottles clink together, doors creak open like reluctant eyes. You pass a lamplighter heading the opposite direction, giving a nod of mutual respect. You both belong to the invisible workforce, guardians of transitions, masters of the boundaries. One morning a girl stops you mid-route, maybe 12 years old, her hair in braids. "Are you the one who wakes my father?" she asks. You nod your head. She stares for a moment, then says, "Thank you." Just that. Then she runs off into the fog. You find yourself smiling for the rest of your route, even as the cold penetrates your coat and the air stings your throat. The work is isolating, but not without appreciation. Sometimes the task changes. You receive a request to wake someone at 4 in the morning for an early train. Another man asks for 7:05 exactly, not a minute sooner, not a second later. You meet all their requirements. You adjust. You become a walking timepiece, more accurate than any brass mechanism ticking on a mantle. And you never, ever sleep late, because who wakes the knocker up? You do, with a backup method. A candle left burning, a teapot that boils dry if you're late, or maybe just the weight of the city itself pressing on your shoulders, whispering, "Wake up." They're waiting now. The world will probably move toward automated timekeeping eventually. Factories installing loud whistles, train stations ringing bells. But for the moment, the city still needs you. Not because you're loud, but because you're reliable. Because you remember every name, every time, every window that opens exactly as requested. You're the city's first whisper each morning, and in the moments before history is recorded, you're the one who starts the day. The smell hits you before anything else, an intense swirling combination of peppermint sagebrush, dried rose petals, and something sharper, like crushed pennyroyal on a stone floor. It clings to your dress, your hands, even your money pouch, and to you it smells like your income. You're an herb woman, not a medical professional, not a mystic, certainly not a pharmacist, although some might whisper that last word with caution. You're something much older than any of those. Part seller of remedies, part mobile pharmacy, part neighbourhood fortune teller with a woven basket on your arm and a complete botanical garden in your mind. At dawn, you arrange your merchandise. Dried bunches tied with string, small fabric bags of powder, glass bottles of liquid extract tightly sealed with wax. Everything is labelled in your handwriting, though most of your customers can't read them anyway. You begin your circuit through the small alleys and courtyards, calling out in a voice that's part song, part invitation. Lavender for peaceful sleep. Thyme for breathing problems. Rosemary for melancholy. Children peek out from behind curtains. Housewives wipe their hands on their aprons and step out onto the street. Men who pretend to doubt your products find reasons to buy just a small piece or two for their wife. You instinctively know who needs what, but you don't always say it directly. You hand the baker's wife a bunch of marjoram and tell her it helps with insomnia. You don't mention that you heard her crying through the open window last night. For the apprentice grocer, it's comfrey root for that persistent cough, you state, even though he insists it's nothing serious. You notice the spots on his shirt. You walk past the church, but you don't go inside. The priest gave you a look once that suggested he'd prefer you didn't enter. That's perfectly fine. You don't need altars. You have stinging nettles which burn sharply enough to remind anyone that they're still alive. Some days, the market vendors look at you as competition. Other days, they offer you friendly acknowledgement. The woman selling flowers once gave you half a box of damaged blooms for your fragrant sachets. You gave her a small jar of healing salve in return that fixed her chapped winter hands. She never forgets your name now. Your remedies aren't guaranteed to work. You know that feverfew doesn't always relieve severe headaches. Not every boiled root can mend a broken heart. But you've observed enough to trust in predictable connections. Chamomile and patience, licorice and deep breathing, sage and strength. And sometimes faith itself is a component of the healing process. There are places where you're always warmly received. The lodging house where the owner lost 3 children, now filled with your lavender bundles. The tailor shop where a small pot of mint grows on the windowsill, in an old teacup you gifted her. The bricklayer's lane where your balm is passed around like a treasure during the cold weather season. And there are residences where you only knock once, gently, and leave what's necessary without speaking. You're not wealthy, nor will you ever be. Your boots are worn through at the heel and your coat is patched so often it's essentially a tapestry of repairs. But your fingers know the texture of crushed valerian root better than any metal coin. Your nose can distinguish between genuine chamomile and the cheap substitute in less than a second. And when someone calls you a healer in the same affectionate tone they once used for your grandmother, you feel satisfied. Because in a city overwhelmed by smog and steel, you remain something green. By the middle of the day, your basket is lighter, but the city seems heavier. The thick fog has settled low, clinging to the paving stones, and the horses' hooves splash in puddles that smell more like industry than rain. You tighten your shawl around your shoulders and turn into the small yard behind the metalworker's shop, where Mrs. Drayton is waiting for you. She doesn't greet you. She simply opens the door and signals for you to step inside. Her daughter is sick again. Anxiety. The doctor says she's stopped eating, sleeps only in short bursts. They gave her an opium-based medicine, but it makes her see shadows. You reach into your basket without speaking and take out 2 items. A thin cloth pouch filled with crushed hops, dry roses and lemon balm for placing under the pillow, and a glass bottle of your personal mixture. Chamomile, skullcap, valerian, and just the faintest hint of clove. It's not magic, you remind her. It's comfort. It's soothing warmth. It's something reliable that wasn't manufactured by a stranger in a formal white jacket. Mrs. Drayton presses coins into your hand and says thank you. Thank you. As if it's the only complete sentence she's capable of saying out loud. Later, you walk past a row of wealthy homes where no one buys your items. They have their own medical professionals, respectable pharmacists with high collars and polished silver tools. Still, you glance toward their windows. You wonder what's growing in their ornamental gardens, if they realise the ivy climbing their stone walls can be used to relieve congestion or, depending on who you ask, irritate the skin. Once a servant girl secretly came out to buy raspberry leaf tea for her sibling. You never saw her again. You still think of her when you walk past that particular door. You know which plants provide healing. You also know which ones don't. Not all of your work involves pleasant smells and gentle salves. There are more dangerous roots in your bag. Foxglove for hearts that beat too fast. Pennyroyal for the types of sensitive issues that are only discussed in hushed tones behind closed doors. You never sell these to just anyone, but you do keep them, not for causing harm, but for offering choice. You've witnessed enough to know that recovery in Victorian Britain is rarely straightforward. Never easy, and often withheld from those who need it the most. As the light begins to fade, you head back to your flat. 1 room, 4th floor, south-facing window, where you hang herbs on strings like decorative flags. The air inside smells of marigolds and old books. You light a candle, pour steaming water over fennel and mint, and soak your tired feet in a basin of rosemary water. Tomorrow the routine starts again. New aches, new individuals, new hands, reaching for help they're too proud to request. But for now, you rest, you drink your tea, and you remind yourself. In a world where so much is grime and quiet indifference, your hands still possess the skill to encourage green life from the soil. You're not some miracle worker. You're not a fraud. You're a herb woman. And with the right timing, in the right household, in the right moment, that's perfectly enough. The opening notes of the melody drift forward like a whisper, rich, unhurried, and faintly off-key. You turn the hand crank a bit further and the sound becomes sharper, clearer, transforming into a spirited dance number. The cobblestone street responds as it always has. A few heads swivel. A child tugs at a parent's arm. Someone peers out from behind a window shade on the upper level. You're a street organ grinder, which means you create music through metal pieces and spinning mechanisms. Mechanisms, not the delicate motion of fingers and strings. Your organ isn't fancy. It's a hand-cranked wooden container roughly the dimensions of a compact cabinet mounted on a wheeled platform. You roll it from one city corner to another. Inside are multiple rotating cylinders fitted with tiny pins that strike small tuned metal teeth. As the crank is turned, it groans, it rattles, it produces a tune, but most critically, it draws a crowd. You pause at the intersection of Rosewood Lane and Bow Street, right outside the tavern, where the windows fog up by midday and the sounds of merriment come before the beer being poured. You don't need sheet music, just tempo, recognition, a touch of style. You begin the morning with a cheerful number. Rule, Britannia, or Daisy Bell, something the elderly ladies will sing softly and the youngsters will move along to. And then, naturally, there's your assistant. He's not technically your possession, but he shows up every morning, reliably, wearing his tiny red coat and matching small hat. His name is Toby. He's a little monkey, and he's the real reason people toss coins into your collecting cup. Toby is remarkably well trained. He bows, he tips his hat. He extends a small brass container and collects money like a skilled panhandler with far better manners. Children squeal with delight. Men offer a grin despite themselves, and women, even those who mutter that street music is vulgar, nearly always give Toby a little coin. You trained him yourself back when you struggled to pay for his meals. He used to attempt to swallow the coins. Now he examines each one like a bank clerk, then places it into the box behind the instrument wheel. There are dangers involved, naturally. Street organ grinders aren't universally welcomed. Some people view you as a source of noise, a type of obstruction, or even worse, an outsider. Many grinders are newcomers, and the accent you carry, Italian, Irish, Polish, affects how people respond to you. Some merchants shout at you. One fellow once threw dirty water at Toby. You stayed away from that particular corner for several weeks, but on most days you're welcomed. Like a wandering tune, you understand your audience. When the factory workers take their break period, you change to emotional songs, slow and tender. When the neighbourhood boys gather, you play something bold and fast, the internal drums pounding, the tempo brisk. And when the sun sinks low and the streets begin to shimmer with an amber colour, you always finish with a tune that's slightly melancholy. Toby is perched on your shoulder by then, tired from the long day. The music lingers in the street long after you've departed. Sometimes you'll hear a fellow humming your closing tune or a young girl singing your melody as she hops down the pavement. You smile, though they never glance up. You're not a performer in a grand hall. Your name isn't displayed on any advertising posters, but you're definitely heard. And in a city where most people walk with their eyes downward, you make them look up. The streets begin to shift as the evening approaches. The butcher drags in his large sign. The lamplighter passes by, nodding as he lifts his small flame. You keep playing one final song for the workers heading to their homes. Their heavy boots scrape on the stone with a rhythm your organ nearly matches. Toby is nestled on the rim of the cart now, sleepy but watchful, his small eyes half shut. He's had a solid day. His little container is weighted with copper coins, and someone even tossed in a small piece of sugar wrapped in paper. He sniffed it, tasted it briefly, and decided it was worth keeping. As you finish your final song, an old sailor's melody whose name you've mostly forgotten, you dab your forehead with a small cloth and engage the locking mechanism on the wheel. The air carries the scent of coal smoke, cooking onions, and something sweet from the nearby bakery. You let yourself imagine having a warm pastry for supper tonight. Not just plain bread, a genuine pastry. You've earned it. Because being a street organ grinder isn't just about turning a crank. It's about knowing precisely when to turn it, where to position yourself, how to read a forming crowd, when to start loudly and when to let the music dissolve like smoke into the small spaces between people's rushed steps. Once a police officer questioned if you had a permit. You did, barely readable, but legally stamped. He still regarded you as if you'd stolen your cart. That evening, you played God Save the Queen outside the station until he emerged and asked you politely to stop. You smiled, Toby bowed, and you moved along. There's a hierarchy among street performers, violin players who think themselves superior, singers who look down on others. But no one stays for as long or travels as far a distance as the grinders. You've pushed your cart from Whitechapel to Chelsea, from the crowded docks to the edge of Hyde Park. You've watched fog roll in so thick it completely muffled the sound. You've performed through freezing rain, light drizzle, shouting and laughter, and you've never once stopped for silence. Unless you made that choice, you fix the organ yourself. It's temperamental now. The air bellows are somewhat stiff, the cylinders scratched from constant use. But you know every squeak, every momentary pause. It's as much a part of your voice as your own breath. Sometimes you dream of owning a finer one, a decorated cart with bright gold trim, a fresh set of tunes, perhaps even a trained parrot or a pair of monkeys with matching hats. But then again, there's something entirely right about the one you currently have. Honest, worn, beloved, just like you. You finish packing up just as the streetlights start to glow amber. Toby stretches, yawns, and climbs up onto your shoulder as if it's his rightful place. Tomorrow, you'll perform again. Maybe on a different street corner. Maybe back where the baker's daughter always smiles when you play the waltz. Maybe near the theatre line where people still hum your tune as they stand and wait. And whether they realise it or not, you'll be there, cranking out music like a physical memory itself. Because in a world that's always rushing, you help it pause, to notice, to simply feel, even if only for one sweet, rotating moment. You arrive quite early, before the bread has fully finished rising and the wagons carrying beer rattle down the main road. Your work apron is already covered with white chalk powder, and your fingers are ready for the familiar smooth movement of the slate under your touch. Today's workspace, a plain black sign no bigger than a small storage closet door. But to you, it's a stage. You're a chalkboard menu artist. Your role is part beautiful handwriting, part persuasion, and part subtle magic. Because in the crowded streets of London, signs are screaming for attention from every direction. Painted, carved, nailed to doorways, suspended from chains. And your goal is to make a person stop and think, oh, that sounds delicious. The menu shifts daily, and your chalk must keep up with it. Some days it's simple beef stew. Other days it's detailed smoked herring on top of bread with eggs cooked to perfection. Your employer, a skinny man with too many opinions and exactly one eyeglass, likes to dictate the exact phrasing while pacing back and forth using suggestions like hearty but appealing and not too scholarly. You nod your head, then proceed to ignore him because you've developed a specific style, a certain curve to the letters, a technique to make treacle tart look like a forbidden secret. You curve the large letter B in bangers and mash like the full belly of a satisfied gentleman. You underline selectively, you add subtle flourishes. A tiny pot giving off steam, a perfect slice of pie, a small fork seeming to dance in the corner. It's not simply drawing, it's a brief performance executed in white powder. The regular customers notice your work. The coal delivery man from 2 buildings away always comments on your drawings of soup. A passing barmaid once asked if you would agree to write her name outside her mother's shop in Hackney. "She won't allow me," she whispered. "She claims chalk is for boys, but your letters look like they're singing. Your fingers are never fully clean. Chalk dust sticks to your cuffs, your collar, your nose. You carry a wiping cloth constantly and a small metal tin containing your 3 favourite chalk pieces. 1 thick, 1 medium size, and 1 extremely thin for adding fine details. There's a constant battle between you and the inevitable rain. You mostly win by working quickly and using bold lines, but every now and then the drizzle starts just as you step back to admire your finished work. The letters run together, the fine points of the script begin to drip. Once you discovered a dog's paw print right across a carefully drawn image of a roast lamb. You nearly burst into tears, but you immediately redrew it. You always start over. Some establishments pay you better than others. One allows you to eat the daily dessert if you complete the work before noon. You've consumed more rich sponge cake and suet pudding than most men twice your age. Another establishment pays only with tea, but the owner permits you to include your signature in the bottom corner. Just an R, but it holds significance. You've even started drawing small scenes in the corners. A cat eyeing the fish dish, a hand reaching for a large tankard, a pie with steam rising to form the word hot in elegant script. Customers pay attention. They lean in closer, they smile. You're not just illustrating food, you're illustrating desire. And in a city full of distractions, that's a kind of power. By the afternoon, the chalkboard becomes more than just a simple advertisement. It's a shared talking point for the local area. People start referring to the menu items by how you depicted them. "I'll have the one with the gravy waterfall," someone says, pointing to your drawing of the shepherd's pie. "The dessert that looks like a fortress," says a small boy in short pants, grinning at your cake sketch with battlements and a cherry on top. You once transformed a simple bowl of hot cereal into a masterpiece. A sun rising from a creamy ocean, rays curling in decorative steam. The oatmeal itself was still ordinary, but they completely sold out before noon. Sometimes the pub owner tries to be creative. "Write something in French," he urges. One morning, throwing down a recipe scribbled on the back of a large ledger book, you pause for a moment. You only have space for 22 letters. You decide on hot beef, whatever's available. The customers laugh heartily. They order in massive numbers. Your unique style starts to spread to other locations. A competing pub across the square employs their nephew to attempt to copy your style. You smile slightly when you walk past his sign. Uneven lettering, decorative elements that resemble clumsy scratches. It's flattering in a strange way. You start incorporating subtle personal marks in your own designs. A distinct loop here, a feathered period there. But it's not just pubs requesting your work anymore. You now receive requests from small pastry shops, tea houses, even a bookstall that wants you to draw a chalkboard of the week's most satisfying novels. You write Oliver Twist pairs well with wheat gruel and draw a bowl with a spoon that looks completely unimpressed. You've started carrying extra small chalkboards, just in case someone needs a quick sign for a brief sale or a written apology for being out of a specific dessert. You once wrote, "Sorry the pudding ran away." It caused 2 passers-by to laugh so loudly they walked inside and bought baked goods they didn't even want. But there's a secret to your success that no one knows. You listen carefully. You arrive before the rush, blend into the morning crowds, and pay attention to the gossip, the complaints, the deep cravings. You figure out what people are truly hungry for long before they even glance at a menu. Not just food, but comfort, a little amusement, a reason to smile despite the coal dust and the daily pressures. And then you give it to them, 1 letter at a time. Sometimes, as you put your chalk pieces back into their tin and wipe your dusty fingertips on your apron, You wonder if this job has a future. What will happen when someone invents signs that can't be erased by water? Ink, perhaps, or painted boards that never change, that stay identical every single day. How terribly dull that would be. Because your signs aren't just simple information. They're fleeting moments, small tokens that disappear by the evening and are recreated fresh each new dawn. You're part artist, part messenger, part brief poet of the day's appetites, and as you walk home, passing couples still joking about your little doodle of a goose, you realise something important. No one remembers the commercially printed menus, but they'll remember the one with the gravy waterfall and the dessert that resembled a fortress, and the pie that seemed to wink at them on their walk to work. You've barely finished setting up the curtain with the stripes when the first pair of dirt-covered boots appears directly in front of you. A young boy, approximately 6 years old, holds a sticky sweet in one hand and a piece of bread crust in the other. He doesn't even blink. He knows exactly the best place to stand. Front and centre, first row. You give the curtain one final adjustment and clear your throat loudly. It's showtime. You're a Punch and Judy puppet master, a street performer, an expert at vocal manipulation, a master of comedic chaos. Your performance space is a brightly painted wooden box barely wider than a barrel, lifted onto a stage with squeaky hinges and hidden compartments. It looks like a brightly coloured playhouse from the front. From the back, it's your confined, sweaty domain of tangled strings, squeaking devices, and unexpected bursts of laughter. That's precisely how it must be done. Your hand quickly pushes up Mr. Punch, grinning wickedly in his red costume and pointy cap. The gathering crowd cheers loudly, a baby starts to cry loudly, someone throws a half-penny coin, the show begins. Punch and Judy isn't a gentle bedtime story, it's pure chaos. It's a cultural institution. It's the type of entertainment that Victorian parents pretend to disapprove of while laughing quietly behind their gloved hands. You duck behind the curtain and settle into position. One hand controls the puppet. The other frantically searches for necessary props. Your voice jumps suddenly in pitch, switching between high-pitched manic giggles and deep guttural growls. Judy makes her entrance, flapping her arms dramatically. Punch hits the sausage. Judy scolds him harshly. Punch lets out a cackle. The baby puppet is dropped carelessly. The crocodile puppet enters the scene. The audience erupts in noise. Children scream with sheer delight. The adults shake their heads and try not to crack a smile. The baker's assistant lets out a loud holler. Someone way in the back is repeating every single line a full beat behind, like an awkward, hiccuping echo. You've performed this show 100 different times, yet it's never the same. The people watching literally determine the story's direction. If they cheer the policeman, he comes out the winner. If they jeer, he gets a serious beating with the stick. One time, a gentleman who'd had too much to drink insisted Punch should face legal proceedings, and you created a courtroom scene on the fly that went on for 15 minutes, culminating with the judge being squashed flat by a chain of sausages. You don't just put on the story, you wrestle with it. The strain of using all those voices takes a toll. You rely on a swazzle, a tiny device made of metal and reed secured in the roof of your mouth, to produce Punch's famous high-pitched shriek. It tickles your throat, makes your jaw hurt, and has caused you to sneeze violently right in the middle of a line more than once. But that sound, that sharp laugh, it's incredible. It's older than gas streetlights, older than the first cheap newspaper. It's the very sound of chaos itself, bouncing through narrow alleys and settling into the minds of children who truly only want to witness someone getting hit with a stick and have a good laugh about it. Mr. Punch isn't some hero, he's a real troublemaker. But in a life filled with regulations, schedules, and constant advice about sitting straight, there's a deep pleasure in a little puppet who throws sausages at figures of authority. You learned this entire craft from an old man named Felix, who used to set up his stage by the docks. He told you timing, son. That's the key. Timing and keeping your sausages under control. You weren't certain if he was joking, but you've repeated those words to yourself before every single performance since then. The audience's rhythm becomes your perfect beat. You listen closely for the little giggles, the sudden intakes of breath, the slightly delayed applause from the youngest kids at the very end. Your puppets dance to that specific music. Punch's strangely shaped nose nods up and down in sync with the laughter. Judy's hand connects just at the right moment. The crocodile always gets a second curtain call if the children shout loud enough for it. Back behind the safety of the curtain, you're utterly drenched, sweating right through your clothes. Your shoulders are throbbing. The swazzle has made your gums quite sore, but your hands keep moving with a kind of second nature, like a musician who no longer has to think about the instrument. It's total chaos, but with a precise plan. And while it may look like absolute nonsense to any random person passing by, you know exactly what your objective is. You're controlling the emotional intensity of the scene. You're the one guiding the feeling. You're narrating a drama with processed meat, a screechy noise, and a puppet that looks like a crazy turnip wearing a fool's costume. The greatest reward. For a glorious 10 minutes, everyone completely forgets their troubles. A housemaid forgets the mountain of laundry waiting to be washed. A chimney sweep stops coughing long enough to genuinely laugh. A little girl in used boots with holes in the toes squeals with pure joy, like royalty. And even the serious-looking men from the accounting firm crack a small smile just before they hurry off, pretending they never stopped at all. And you, totally unseen behind the cloth, hear every single bit of it. Sometimes you sneak in your own personal little jokes, Mr. Punch making fun of the Prime Minister, or Judy announcing she's leaving to become a rocket scientist. The grown-ups catch those ones. They quietly snicker to themselves. They drop a copper coin into your donation tin, not for the performance itself, but for the inside joke hiding just beneath the surface. On good days, you earn enough money to cover dinner, a draft beer, and a piece of hard cheese to share with the neighbourhood cat who guards your puppet box all night. On truly great days, someone hires you for a birthday gathering or a summer garden event. You bring the entire collection: Punch, Judy, the baby crocodile, the policeman, the hangman, even the ghost. Yes, there's a ghost now. You created him for Halloween and couldn't bear to retire him. Your puppets are stitched up, frayed, and are missing a button or two, but each one has a distinct sound you developed, a specific movement that's entirely their own. They live inside a wooden chest that smells strongly of cedar, dust, and perspiration. When you lift the lid, it's like unsealing an old children's book that's been shouted out loud instead of quietly read. You've stopped keeping track of the total number of shows you've done, but you can always recall the memorable ones. The day the boy with the injured eye sat right up front and laughed louder than anyone else. The day the elderly woman on crutches said, "I haven't heard that sound since my own brothers were kids." The day someone called you a genuine artist. You're not sure you fully believe them, but then again, not everyone possesses the ability to transform a simple wooden box, a scrap of fabric, and a silly squeak into something that causes total strangers to genuinely laugh together even when it's raining. And tomorrow you'll start the whole process over again, because in a city filled with smoke and sadness, Mr. Punch always gets the last laugh. Adults avert their eyes and suppress quiet grins. The baker's son releases a squeal of delight. Somebody toward the rear echoes each line a beat too slow, like delayed thunder with the stammers. You have performed this act innumerable times, yet it is never precisely identical. The onlookers mould the narrative. When they cheer the constable, he triumphs. When they ridicule him, he catches a blow from the stick. Once an intoxicated lawyer demanded Punch-face trial, and you created a courtroom absurdity that lasted quarter of an hour and concluded with the magistrate being crushed by a chain of sausages. You do not simply repeat the tale, you grapple with it. The puppet voices demand a price. You employ a swazzle, a tiny metal and reed device pressed against your upper palate to create Punch's signature shriek. It irritates your throat, exhausts your jaw, and has triggered violent bouts of sneezing during the performance on multiple occasions. But oh, that sound, that wild screech. It existed before gaslighting, existed before the penny press. It is the pure voice of disorder, reverberating through narrow alleys and into the hearts of youngsters who merely want to witness someone getting smacked with a stick and consider it hilarious. Mr. Punch is not a champion, he is mayhem personified, yet in an existence drowning in rules, timepieces and sermons on proper behaviour. There is something deeply gratifying about a marionette who hurls sausages at figures of authority. You learned the method from a fellow named Felix who worked near the docks. He instructed you, timing lad. Everything relies on timing and sausage management. You could not determine if he was joking, but you have recited those words before each performance ever since. The crowd's pulse becomes your rhythm guide. You listen for the brief chuckles, the sharp intakes of breath, the delayed clapping from small children in the back. Your marionettes move to that sonic landscape. Punch's twisted nose bobbles in sync with the merriment. Judy's strike connects not a moment too early. The crocodile always gets a response if the kids yell with enough vigour. Behind the screen you are burning, drenched through your collar. Your joints protest. The swazzle has rubbed your mouth tissue tender. Yet your movements proceed with a kind of muscle memory, like a cellist who has stopped thinking about the strings. It is pandemonium with a hidden structure. And while it may look like foolishness to someone passing by, you understand precisely what you are doing. You are controlling the rhythm. You are steering feeling. You are telling a tale with cured meat, a shrill voice, and a figure that looks like a deranged vegetable dressed like a jester. The finest part. For 10 solid minutes, everyone loses themselves. A washerwoman forgets the mountain of linens waiting for scrubbing. A chimney sweep stops hacking long enough to emit a quick laugh. A small girl in hand-me-down shoes, with openings in the bottoms, squeals like royalty. And even the serious-faced gentlemen from the bookkeeping firm permit a faint grin before hurrying off, acting as if they never paused. And you, concealed by the curtain, absorb it all. Sometimes you add your own remarks, Mr. Punch mocking the Prime Minister or Judy announcing she is departing to pursue education. The grown-ups catch those references. They laugh quietly. They drop a penny in your tin, not for the show, but for the clever quip inside it. On profitable days you collect enough money for supper, an ale, and a bit of cheese to split with the vagrant cat who watches your puppet chest overnight. On exceptionally good days, someone engages you for a birthday celebration or a garden affair, and you transport the entire troupe. Punch, Judy, Baby, Alligator, Constable, Executioner, even the Spectre. Yes, there is a ghost now. You added him last autumn and could not manage to remove him. Your puppets are mended, faded, and lacking fasteners, but each holds a unique voice. A gesture that is exclusively theirs, you invented. They live in a trunk that reeks of cedar, face powder, and sweat. When you raise the cover, it is like opening a volume that has been shouted instead of spoken. You have ceased counting how many performances you have given, but you recall the significant ones. The evening the youngster with the covered eye claimed the front spot and giggled louder than everyone. The evening the elderly lady on crutches said, "Have not heard that noise since my brothers were living." The evening someone called you an artist. You are uncertain if you accept the label, but then again, not everyone can convert a wooden crate, some fabric, and a squeal into something that makes strangers laugh together in drizzling rain. And tomorrow you will repeat it all again, because in a city of ash and misery, Mr. Punch still gets the final laugh. You navigate the wagon cautiously across the rough pavement, wheels groaning as it bumps over each fissure. The wooden panels shudder slightly, and inside, under the tarp and cord, your prize waits. A cumbersome, angular contraption of dark wood, brass and glass. Your portable partner, your profession, your sustenance. You are a street photographer with a travelling darkroom, not the refined sort with a studio and thick curtains. Not the portraitist who photographs wealthy women in lace beside potted ferns. You are the type who pursues the light, establishes yourself at intersections, in town squares, outside mills, when the noon bell chimes, providing instant mementos for a few spare pennies. You locate your position near the train depot, where sweethearts say farewell, servicemen leave, and every third individual seems to require a face worth preserving. You unfold your wooden frame, clean the glass with your sleeve edge, and wait. It takes barely a moment. Can you photograph two people? The young lady inquiring hardly glances at you, her gloved fingers tightly entwined with the man beside her. They stand rigid and nervous, the sort of bearing reserved for both photographs and burials. You nod. You motion toward the painted scenery mounted behind your apparatus, a worn canvas showing a formal garden somewhat bleached from sunlight and age. They stare at it as if it might grant them dignity or comfort. You arrange them into position, hands clasped, faces ahead, eyes raised slightly. You have discovered the secret to a good likeness is not in the machinery. It is in capturing the instant just briefly enough for the narrative to be frozen. You lift the dark fabric and crouch beneath it, adjusting the focus, checking the illumination. The sun breaks through just enough through the overcast heavens. You slide in the plate, hold your breath. Click. Motion becomes recollection. The processing is not instantaneous. Not entirely. You ask them to remain as you withdraw into the rear of your wagon, your enclosed refuge. It is scarcely large enough to huddle in, and it reeks of chemicals, wet wood, and time condensed. In the crimson glow of your safety lamp, you measure carefully. Developer, fixer, wash. The shallow basin trembles. A face emerges. Two, actually, gentle and slightly astonished, as if they had not anticipated it to succeed. You have accomplished it again. You have captured something tangible. You step out with the completed image, still damp and reeking of harsh chemicals. They gasp softly, grin, and place several coins into your palm. She slips the photograph into her purse as if it is precious. By this point a small queue is assembled. A young lad, grimy knees and all, clutching a worn penny. An older lady with a pressed bonnet and an eager expression. A pair of seamen, boisterous and cursing, who swear they will be completely motionless if you make us appear like we are not fools. You grin. You know better than to guarantee that each countenance tells a tale, and each photograph becomes a treasure someone did not know they needed until they witnessed it rise from your pan like a recollection surfacing. You are not merely a photographer, you are a keeper of spirits, and this container of mechanisms and glass, it is your snare. As the day advances, your hands become darker, brown from the developing fluid, crimson from the fixing chemicals, the lines of your nails permanently coloured with the mute evidence of your occupation. You have attempted protective gloves, but they hamper your dexterity. It is preferable to sense the slide of the plate, the rim of paper edges, the slick wetness of moist glass as the picture materializes like air held too long. You have learned the minor techniques. A droplet of oil to add warmth to pallid complexions, a swift dab of chalk to highlight a collar in the dimness, a breath upon the aperture right before the shutter clicks for that gentle hazy effect the women favour. Not every client wants beauty. Some want truth, or at least their interpretation of it. The mill foreman insists on showing his timepiece chain so it is evident in the photograph. Must appear proper, he grumbles. The laundress begs you to hide the mark on her face. It is not who I am anymore. And a seaman once pleaded with you to make him appear taller. You placed a wooden box under his boots and said nothing. You are not simply recording looks, you are preserving intent. Some come to you discreetly. A young lady, trembling in her wrap, asks for a portrait, but no name, no mark, no duplicate copy. You nod, you capture her picture, and you never ask why. The expression in her gaze conveyed enough. Children, though, present the greatest difficulty, always squirming, shutting eyes, shifting at the final second. You have invented distractions, Tell them to balance a marble steady in their palm or to pretend the camera is a magical beast and they must confront it. The outcomes are often flawed but full of life, and sometimes there are individuals who simply position themselves before you and smile. No arrangement, no demands, just their genuine selves. Those photographs linger in your thoughts the longest. You keep a separate box under your wagon. Inside, covered in cloth, are plates you never delivered, abandoned customers, unclaimed instants, a photograph of a serviceman who never returned, a lady who stood with a letter in her hand, its wax intact, a lad with a hound that gazed straight into the aperture as if it comprehended everything. You name them your silent witnesses. On rainy days, when nobody comes, you enter the dark chamber, examine the box, and remember not their identities, those disappeared long ago, but the meaning of their expressions, the manner they gazed at you, not as a merchant, but as someone who could freeze time, just for them. You have never possessed a photograph of yourself. It seems wrong somehow, as if being seen too plainly would shatter the magic, because here, behind the apparatus, you are both invisible and omniscient. You are the vision that watches, the hand that arranges, the silent builder of recollection. And when your final plate is developed and the last photograph dries beneath the wagon, you gather your frame, secure the canvas, and move down the street, past the bakers, the lamplighters, the shouting paper vendors, with your silent witnesses accompanying you and the metropolis and onward, waiting for preservation. The space smells of tea, flowers, starch, and something faintly citrus. Lemon wax, likely, buffed into ivory. You sit at a polished table beneath a high window, where sunlight falls exactly, slanted across fragile silk parchment. Your hands are already marked, your wrist firm. Before you lies an unfolded fan of pale silk stretched over delicate crimson ribs of ivory. It is empty, waiting. You are a fan painter, and this fan is your surface, not a surface in the traditional sense. There is no room for mistakes here. One error of the brush and the entire work is destroyed. The silk spreads if you apply too much pressure, fights back if you move too gently. Every mark must be flawless the first attempt. The fan's commissioner is a lady of substantial wealth, naturally. Nobody else commissioned such items. She appeared with a sample of her evening gown and a vague request, something romantic, but not excessively sentimental. You knew precisely what she intended. You outlined lightly in charcoal simple forms, a moonlit garden, a pair of lovers neither too daring nor too timid. You have rendered this image before, but each iteration is different. A shifted angle of the head, a more abundant blossom, a bird in the distance, or missing. The pigment is blended with precision, colour, and adhesive. A hint of egg white for lustre. Your brush is camel hair, narrow as a needle. You paint in strokes tinier than a whisper. There is music nearby, a string quartet muffled from the parlour below. It makes the hand steadier. It silences the memory of your first mistake, years past. A cherry blossom rendered too big, too bold. The patron refused payment. You incinerated the fan in a gutter. You do not make mistakes now. Sometimes as you paint you wonder where this fan will travel. Into a gloved hand at a lawn party, assembly, raised flirtatiously during a waltz, released deliberately at the boots of some gentleman who reeks of cigars and yearning. Will he retrieve it? Will she permit him? You have painted fans that terminated engagements, others that sparked romances. One was sent back in fragments after a dispute. Another landed in the Royal Archive, though nobody mentioned your name. Fan painters do not sign their creations. Not formally. You know your marks. A tiny bug at the edge of the second spine, a curl in the pattern that shouldn't be there, your hidden signature, your small rebellion. As the hours pass, you pause only to flex your fingers. The light fades, the silk gives beneath your brush. The clients appear, the flowers bloom. You don't paint what's real. You paint what should be. You paint longing, distance, the moment before a touch, and though you'll never hold this fan again, your strokes will be remembered in every flick of the wrist that opens it, every flutter that draws eyes. By evening the painting is nearly done. You add the final details in silence, a thin silver stroke to the mist, the gleam of moonlight on a fountain, a shadow that hints mystery but reveals nothing. The fan is delicate, but the story it tells is deliberate. Enough suggestion to spark curiosity, not enough to invite gossip. That balance is your real skill. You've painted fans for widows, maidens, lovers, aristocrats, all of them. Different faces, same needs. They want beauty, yes, but also power. A fan in the right hand is a language, a shield, a weapon. You've learned the codes passed between servants. A fan tap to the cheek means yes. To the chin means no. Opened wide, it's desire. Half closed, it's danger. Dropped means follow me. You never learned these codes from books. You learned by watching at the back of ballrooms. You stood behind a cousin who married well, holding her shawl, her glass, her silence, and you saw what fans did when words couldn't be spoken. That's why you started painting them, not as decorations, but as tools. The fan you finish tonight is one of your best. The folds catch the light perfectly, each spine a slice of a moonlit garden, each opening a fresh breath of illusion. You hang it by the window and watch how it shivers. It works, and it waits. You pack it carefully in a padded box, deliver it yourself, because fans, like secrets, should never be trusted to messengers. The client greets you in a dressing gown and pearls, barely glancing at the box. But when she lifts the fan, opens it once, twice, and smiles at her reflection in the mirror, then you know she's seen it. The softness of her nod is the only praise you'll ever get, but it's enough. You walk home with empty hands, but stained fingertips. The smell of gum arabic clings to your clothes. You pass gas lamps, hear piano music spilling from windows, and somewhere far off, a burst of laughter from a party you'll never attend. And yet your work is already there. A fan painted by your hand will move through that room. It will wave beside a vest. It will snap shut with a crack sharp enough to silence a rumour. It will fall deliberately at the exact moment two gazes meet. No one will say your name. But in that brief pause between seeing and acting, your story will unfold. Because though the silk may fade and the paint may chip, the performance you designed will come alive again each time the fan is opened. And that, in this city of surfaces and polished truths, is a kind of forever. You strap the boards to your body like a walking sandwich of wooden statements, one front, one back. Painted letters declare try Mrs. Bletchley's tonic for nerves, stomach upset and moral confusion. The words bounce slightly as you walk, turning you into a moving paragraph, a human billboard with legs. You're a sandwich board man, and your job is simple. Be seen, not heard, not questioned, just noticed. You start your day outside Charing Cross, blending into the tide of shoes and noise. You walk slowly, never too fast, making sure every word of your sign has time to sink into someone's brain before they disappear into a train car or a cafe queue. It's not noble, but it earns a coin or two, and the rules are wear the boards, stay upright, keep moving, avoid puddles, dogs and children who think it's funny to knock on your back panel. You do your job in silence, but your mind is far from empty. As you drift past butchers and tobacco shops, you build small sentences in your head. This way walks despair, with shoes worn thin but letters bold. A man of messages but never his own. No one asks your opinion, just the opinion of the boards you carry. This time it's Mrs. Bletchley's tonic. Last time it was a bakery. The time before, a lawyer offering discreet divorce arrangements. No fuss, no blame. That one got several knowing looks and a slap on the back. You don't flinch anymore when people read your board aloud, as if it's a joke. You're used to the chuckling, the mocking tones, the people who say he's probably never even had nerves or stomach upset. You have, you just don't advertise it. There are familiar faces who meet you on your route. One woman always gives a quiet "good morning, dear," as if you're her slightly odd nephew. A boy sells roasted chestnuts near the park and gives you the ones that crack early. Your favourite, a man with an umbrella who reads every single board you wear and never laughs. He just nods solemnly, as if he understands. Sometimes when the client wants to be clever, you're given props. A jar of fake medicine bottles to hold in one hand, a pair of sandwich boards hung from the side. Once, a feathered hat with a sign that said, "Don't look at my hat, look at my back." You wore it, you hated it, you got paid. The job is seasonal. In rain, the boards warp. In wind, they act as sails. In heat, they stick to your back like extra skin. You've had straps break, letters peel. Once a dog pissed on your ankle mid-advertisement, but still you show up, you walk, you advertise. Because as strange as it sounds, there's something oddly honourable in being dependable, even if it's just as an ad with shoes. And you've learned something no sign can teach. People see you, even if they pretend not to. You find your rhythm by noon. That's when the streets are most crowded. Vendors shouting, horses clattering, shop doors swinging open and shut with a beat that sounds almost like breathing, and you, stuck somewhere in between, swaying slightly under the weight of your message. Mrs. Bletchley's tonic for a finer digestion. Someone snorts. You keep walking. The sign creaks as you move. You've learned to listen to it, not just for cracks or shifts, but for rhythm. Every ad has a sound, a sway, a pace. You walk to it. If you don't, the weight distributes wrong. The backboard slaps against your spine, the front digs into your knees. You become part of the structure. You used to feel ashamed by it, this walking role as human punctuation. But after a while, something changes. You stop thinking of yourself as the message. You start thinking of yourself as the frame. After all, the cobbler sign doesn't want the shoes, it just lifts them. Some afternoons, you swap boards. Halfway through, your boss hands you a new set. Mother Pence's die, black as your regret. You laugh. It's a better laugh than yesterday's tooth powder fights back. You strap it on and head toward the Strand, where more eyes wander. Then a kid asks the question you get at least once a week. Do you ever read your own signs? You smile and nod. Of course. I carry them, don't I? She thinks about that, frowns as if it's too obvious to be interesting, then skips off. But it stays with you. Do you believe the signs? Have you ever bought a tonic? Gone to the bakery? Sent a discreet divorce letter to the man in the red coat on Cork Street? No. And yet you've sold them all. With your silence you start to notice patterns. Which messages get coins dropped into your coat pocket? Which ones make people cross the street without looking at you? The worst boards are the ones too clever by half. Nobody reads a joke in a hurry, the best short, bold, unapologetic bread that doesn't argue. That one made a butcher laugh so hard he gave you a whole shilling. By dusk the paint starts to flake around the edges. The straps dig into your body. You feel like a walking tombstone. By the time you return the boards to the storage shed behind the print shop, you twist your body, stretch your spine. You're just a man again, no longer a sentence. And yet, as you walk home, something lingers. You look at the windows you passed earlier, now glowing with gaslight, at the people eating food you advertised, reading papers you once wore, and you realise tonight, in some small way, you shaped the street, not as a voice, not as a writer, but as the quiet, walking pause between the city's words. And tomorrow you'll be another one. The workshop smells of flower dust and faded ambition. You sit by the window in a low chair with a loop of string wound around your fingers and a bundle of threads held in your palm. The light is poor today, but your eyes are used to strain. You don't need much to do your job. You're a tassel maker, and your life is one of loops, knots and threads that must never tangle. The bell above the shop door hasn't rung in hours, but that's normal. Your trade doesn't demand attention. It's quiet, ornamental, secretly essential. No one thinks about fringe until it's needed. The moment you search for them, they show up everywhere. They dangle from parlour curtain cords. They swing on key chains and doorknobs. They're stitched onto the hems of cushions, jackets, lamp covers, and theatre programme bookmarks. They're even hidden inside the creases of umbrellas, where the fine braided loop gives a lady a firm, graceful grip. You make each one by hand. It begins with the head, a solid centre wrapped tight in thread until it's smooth and round. Then comes the skirt, where the threads are gently combed out like a small horse's tail. You trim, measure, and tie. You attach loops, add bands, and sometimes, if the customer is rich enough, you weave in beads. The method is constant, even calming in its own way. Loop, tighten, fasten. You count in sets of 4. You hum a soft tune. You consider your craft. Some tassels are meant to accent a bigger piece, maybe a hassock or a long cloak. Your workshop smells of velvet scraps, string, and silk. The rule is to make it dance but not shout. You know the nuance needed. Once, a man ordered a tassel for the end of his cane. He said it was for flair, twisting his moustache as he talked. You made one for him in green and gold, tied in a coil that made you think of champagne bubbles climbing. He bowed, tipped his hat, and walked out looking like he'd just been given a knighthood. Your direct clients are seldom the final owners. They're usually decorators, household stewards, boutique keepers with demanding standards, a few milliners, and one especially reserved harpist who insists on custom fringe for her tuning key. You work in quiet while the city moves on outside. Sometimes you hear the steady tap of hooves on the cobblestones and picture the places your tassels go, swinging from expensive coaches, dangling in grand parlours where private things are murmured under crystal chandeliers, or stored in compartments beside bottles of scent and unsent notes. Once, you spotted one of your pieces hanging from the edge of a countess's seat in a newspaper illustration of a lawn party. You cut the picture and saved it for weeks before it got smudged by ink and tossed away. The shop's front glass holds a basic arrangement, a single red tassel with a brass top, positioned as if caught mid-sway. Most people walk straight by. A few peek in, but the bulk do not stop. But the ones who step inside, they know exactly what they're looking for. They've come for a certain thing, a specific accent, the ideal finishing touch. Something that stirs when the breeze enters. Something that suggests a secret. This, too, was intended. You store your threads in old tea cans, sorted by weight and shine. Your golden threads rest beside your crimson tones. Your midnight blues and sage greens occupy a shared container. The variations of ivory, eggshell, alabaster, chalk, and wedding white are maintained apart, for they will twist together if mishandled. You have discovered their characters. Silk tangles differently than cotton does. Rayon will unravel if you handle it with too much pressure. Linen can be stubborn. In the crisp dawn hours, you carefully direct each strand into its designated place, like training a group of field mice to march in formation. Nothing gets thrown away in your studio. Even the tiny pieces clipped from the fringe hems, like trimming hair, are saved for quick repairs, craft supplies for youngsters, or an impromptu plaything for the skinny stray cat who considers your windowsill her territory. Some days the jobs are fairly routine. 10 matching holdbacks for a family dwelling, decorative trim for a piano teacher's waiting area. But then, the unique requests come through. The type that make the time disappear quickly. A performance company needs 20 fringes to complement a spectre's costume. They asked you to give them a particular threatening movement, and you delivered it. A customer orders a single tassel with a cream-coloured head and black trim for a memorial service. He offered no explanation. You decided not to probe. But when he returned several weeks later to buy a second, this time in a soft silver grey, you realised that something significant had changed. Then there was the newlywed, who desired tassels on her hand coverings so they might float as I wave goodbye. She compensated with paper money and a slice of marzipan cake wrapped in fine netting. You consumed it gradually, entirely alone. You never thought that crafting tassels would become your life's work. It started as a simple assignment, back when you were hemming lower garment borders for a hat maker. But your tassels disappeared faster than her headpieces, so you arranged your own small workspace, began producing your own coils, and built your own modest business. And now your hands operate based entirely on muscle memory. You can secure a thread cap while maintaining a complete conversation, and you could weave a rope while unconscious. You have created thousands, some refined, some unusual. One was designed like a tropical fruit for a man who demanded an exotic touch. You did not question his reasoning. Your name is never linked to the finished product, but you identify your own handiwork. You spot it displayed behind retail counters, hanging over stage draperies, or dangling from a velvet cord in front of a gallery exhibit where visitors approach and totally overlook the suspended fibers. But you catch it. You pass by, experiencing a private contentment, and think that piece is mine. It feels strange, maybe, to devote yourself to producing something that exists solely to dangle, to embellish, to sway gently. But in this rigid, sooty metropolis, where boundaries are harsh, and speech is frequently even harsher, your work brings a softness, a grace, a quiet hint of festivity, mourning, or respect. And as long as there are drapes that need drawing, doorways that swing wide, or memories that need attached to a garment's hem, someone will require a tassel, and that person will ultimately discover their way to you. You are awake and prepared before the chapel bells ring 6. Your work cloth is fastened, your container is ready, and your voice is strong and waiting. You are a sheet music peddler, a wandering merchant of written notes, chords, and aspirations transferred to parchment. Your goods are carefully organized. Sheets of musical symbols and verses are fastened at the corners and arranged by their recommended tempo. You stock waltz time numbers, melancholy songs, hymn selections, and cheerful numbers, some intended for the private parlour, some for the neighbourhood tavern, and some exclusively for the personal soul. The metropolis churns loudly around you. Wagons filled with charcoal rattle past, market vendors shout, and rooftop cleaners call out, but your own announcement is gentler. You promote fresh songs from the entertainment district, compositions for piano and vocal arrangements. You describe your delivery as a melodic cry, a cadence you have mastered to lift just beyond the general commotion, but never so forceful that it appears frantic. Nobody believes a frantic melody. You station yourself beside the musical stores that declined to employ you, but value the complementary audience you draw, beyond tea shops and near learning institutions where young ladies in proper bonnets transport notation tied with twine, wishing for the opportunity to play something their teacher did not assign. Your patrons are varied. A middle-aged man with sleeve edges darkened by grease purchases a comic duet to share with his children. A timid young lady wants something cheerful, but still appropriate. For an evening recital, you suggest to her the water wheel jig, a respectable, brisk piece with sufficient rhythm to gently raise the corners of a solemn expression. Every composition has its place. You stock time-honoured classics, The Forgotten Bells, Gentleman Joseph, Mariner's Homecoming, but you also stock recent publications from composers you have never met, printed on rougher stock, still faintly heated from the press. They come creased and unbound, and your job is to present them as if they are guaranteed to become the next popular standard. You have cultivated an ability for reading people. Some desire melancholy, a gentle piece in a sombre key to mirror the sensation of their past several days. Others crave a giggle, a rapid jig, a touch of theatrical stage amusement. You produce each sheet like a card from a collection, aligning their disposition to a progression of tones. The earnings are slim, and your wages are even slimmer. A sliver of a coin here, a tinier sliver there. You complete more sales when it is sprinkling. It is a curious truth, but accurate. There is something about damp conditions that makes folks yearn for warm lamplight and a song. You keep your papers thoroughly wrapped in treated fabric, tucked beneath your elbow or within a weathered cloth satchel. When the wind rises, a single splash of water can ruin an entire sheet. You have surrendered compositions to the humid air before, and still, when the sunshine breaks through and you witness someone softly tapping their heel to a tune they have not experienced in decades, it feels like genuine magic. You are not a song composer, you are not a professional vocalist, but you enable the passage of music into being, and in this bleak, labouring city, that is a valuable role. By the midpoint of the afternoon, the roads settle into their familiar pulse, footsteps pounding, infants wailing, the muted, deep tone of the gas lamp attendants preparing their tools. You have shifted into the narrower side streets now, where the residences are tinier, but the panes stay unshuttered, and keyboard melodies drift quietly through the fragile partitions. You stop near one for just an instant and identify the tune floating out. The Fighter's Sorrow, a piece you distributed 3 weeks ago to a youngster with stained ink on her digits and a smudge of grime on her cheek. She had wavered over the price, but bought it regardless, clutching it firmly as if it meant something greater than just markings on parchment. You give a slight grin. That is the reason you persist. Every sheet you distribute is more than simply music. It is potential, an opportunity for someone to express an emotion they cannot articulate in verbal speech. Happiness, intense grief, aching yearning, all for just a handful of tiny coins. You put the capability directly into their grasp. You have observed its impact. The silent child who never uttered a word until he performed music. The mourner who requested nothing but a gentle piece for a solitary voice. The young housemaid who hid her sheet music under her sleeping mat, rehearsing late after everyone else was resting. You have distributed to dignified chapels and massive choral societies, to saloon keyboard players and religious education teachers. Once, you even distributed a piece to a sidewalk entertainer who integrated a printed waltz into his performance. He claimed it made the pale doves take flight on command. You did not question how he managed it. Not every sale is agreeable. A fellow once purchased a romantic ballad only to tear it in two when he spotted his former lover across the avenue. You promptly suggested him a drinking song instead. He laughed, took the song and gave you twice the amount. Some patrons only desire the lyrics, scribbled onto a scrap of newsprint or transcribed into tiny journals. Others cannot interpret the notation but request you to hum one phrase so they can grasp the feeling. You oblige when your throat is not too worn. Your singing is imperfect, but it is honest. And on the days when the daylight fades rapidly and your limbs feel weighted with exhaustion, you still transport your bundle as if it were precious metal. Because you never anticipate when someone will need the exact right song, the one they never even knew they required. You move past a bread shop, and the counter worker inside signals at you. You distributed her a quick, spirited jig last winter, and she performed it at her relative's celebration. She later told you it got the whole household dancing, even her elderly uncle, who had abandoned joy after his crop of root vegetables perished. You signal back gently, experiencing a sense of quiet warmth. At the close of the day, you tally your coins, rubbed smooth and blackened with handling. You flatten out your leftover sheets, delicately straighten the edges that have been folded, and position the most optimistic piece on top. Either springtime returns or the path homeward, depending on how the evening breeze feels. And as you travel back through the dimming light avenues, your satchel emptier and your heart surprisingly content. You whistle one of the compositions aloud, quiet and steady, just loud enough to echo off the stone buildings, because you are the city's wandering song merchant. And in the spaces between the loud racket and the soot particles, you give London with its melody. You drag your modest wagon along the delivery route behind a bread maker where the glass vessels are always heated from being near the ovens. You are a glass container collector, and while your occupation may sound simple, it is one of the most quietly essential services in your whole neighbourhood. Your attention constantly scans windowsills, shop doorways, tiny rear yards, and pub counters. You are searching for the faint gleam of vacant jars, small ones with tight mouths that once contained jams, square ones that were filled with mustard or a relish, taller containers from apothecaries or grooming establishments. You knock softly on the rear doors of establishments, presenting a gentle, well-rehearsed inquiry. Any glass for me today, intact or cracked? I accept both kinds. Most days the reply is yes. In this period, glass is regarded as extremely valuable. It is capable of being reprocessed, scrubbed, and distributed again, but few individuals desire the burden of repurposing it themselves, and even fewer desire to risk storing fractured jars that could splinter further if handled. That is your role. You gather, sort, cleanse, and redistribute, functioning like a concealed operator in the commerce of everyday essentials. This morning you have already gathered 3 brine jars, 1 sugar cone vessel, and a peculiar round-based flask from a seamstress, who mentioned it once contained something that should not be inhaled. You honoured her caution. Back at your dwelling, your cramped shed is a warehouse of glass. You have constructed shelving along every wall and stacked them with jars, categorised by their size and clarity. Some are flawless, perfect for resale to confectioners and provision merchants. Others are nicked or cloudy, but you know an apothecary proprietor who actually favours that look. He insists it gives his medicinal solutions a sense of timeless credibility. You are not opposed to simple fixes either. You have discovered how to file down a jagged rim, remove stubborn stickers, and repair a fractured cap using wax or a flexible sealant. You once even mended a broken jar using egg protein and lime, an ancient technique handed down from an older relative who once manufactured ink in her hearth. But you do not just distribute them back to the merchants. You also trade with glass craftsmen who liquefy the worthless fragments down and compensate you based on their combined weight. And sometimes a domestic worker or a baker's partner will give you half a loaf of bread or a jar of cooking grease in return for 3 identical jars. A reasonable exchange, you always respond. You recall it as one of your most gratifying experiences when you spotted a row of your salvaged jars on the front window showcase of a distinguished druggist's on a primary street, each one packed with dried lavender and marked with graceful script. You maintained your silence, just remained outside for a while, appreciating your unrecognised contribution to the city's complex system. You are not seeking recognition, you are driven by usefulness. You are the silent mechanism of recycling for a city that throws away much more than it understands. And at the conclusion of the day, when your palms carry a mild scent of vinegar and beeswax, and you have traded 20 jars for 2 shillings, a kind remark and a meat pie, you experience a particular sense of satisfaction. Because in a world operated by machines and grime, you have discovered a method to make the tiniest objects significant once more. You travel past a sequence of brick dwellings where the kitchen windows are always foggy in the chill, and you know precisely which households will reserve their glass for you without being reminded. Some even provide them a swift wash, while others deliver them still coated with sticky jam or crusted with mustard grains. You welcome them all. You are not choosy. Nearer to the docks, you have an unspoken arrangement with a seafood vendor who preserves his vinegar containers and the small jars that once held preserved onions. You exchange him for stacks of kindling, which are timber scraps you collect from the cooper's yard and sort by hand. You are a gatherer, but you are also an essential link. Your web of connections extends quietly across the metropolis. The baker who requires jars for his berry preserves knows to summon you. The widowed woman who produces scented hair tonics in her cellar wants your clearest jars with intact closures. And there is an elderly gentleman 2 streets away who will only purchase from you because you never give me one with a shattered base. You have built a standing now, and it is remarkable how folks begin to regard you like a fixed part of the landscape. Children gesture when you pass by. One even sketched your wagon in chalk once. It was crooked, but it pleased you for the remainder of the day. A shopkeeper once presented you a glass of ale simply because you always appear like you are lost in contemplation. But what you are typically considering is the glass, the way it refracts, the way it captures the light, the best approach for stacking it so it does not crack. Whether a pale green jar with a thin neck would be more suitable for a flour merchant than for a baker. You consider the stories these jars hold, the spices they have stored, the dishes they have helped prepare, the small fingers that once snatched jam from them late at night. And you wonder how peculiar it is that something so fragile can frequently outlive most other things in this urban landscape. Sometimes you discover elegance in the flawed ones, a crack that gracefully curves like climbing ivy, a tiny air pocket trapped in the wall like a frozen droplet. You have preserved a few exceptional ones tucked away in a cupboard. One contains your buttons, one maintains your chalk dry. One, your absolute favourite, is filled with polished river pebbles from the nearby waterway, each one ground smooth by years of flowing water. At night, when the street lamps glow and you are back at your dwelling, you organise the day's findings on your work table. You wipe down each jar's rim with a worn rag until it shines. You separate the dangerously sharp pieces for melting. You buff the best fragments until they catch the light. And when you rinse your hands and look over what you've gathered, simple, clear, imperfect, you understand something deeper. You aren't just collecting jars, you're collecting silent stories, not the tales people tell out loud, but the ones they leave behind, trapped in the glass, beneath the dirt, in the small marks you trace with your fingertip, and in the quiet rattle of your cart as it moves across brick streets right after sunset. Maybe, just maybe, London pays attention back. You sit under a canvas covering, knees drawn close, the scissors reflecting the light that comes through. You're a silhouette artist, and your hands are all you really need. You don't use ink or pencil, just black paper, sharp scissors, and a feel for the invisible lines that show who a person truly is. Your small booth sits at the walkway's edge, sometimes by the great exhibition building, or now and then outside the theatre where couples pass in their best clothes, their faces flushed from drink or the cool night. They stop, interested. Then they sit down. "Just face the side, Ma'am," you say softly, turning the wooden seat toward the right light. The trick is keeping them from feeling nervous. Confidence is what matters most. Your confidence, not theirs. They stay still. You glance once, then again. Then the scissors start their work. Snip, turn, slice. There's no stopping to think. No rough drafts. You cut straight from what your eyes see to what your hands create. One wrong move, and the paper's wasted. But you don't make many mistakes now. You know how to show a chin with a small downward angle, a tight curl with a quick twist of your wrist, the brim of a woman's bonnet, the width of a man's collar. Every careful cut says more than just shape. It reveals character. Within a minute or two, you're done. What remains is a delicate, dark form standing out against the white backing paper. You fix it in place, making a side portrait that somehow says more about the person than a full painting ever would. They always react with surprise. "Oh, that's really me." You offer a second one at half price. People often want one for someone they love, or for their mothers. You've watched women hold the silhouette close like it's something sacred. You've seen plenty of men try to look unbothered while tucking it into their vest pocket. You don't talk much during the work. Words can break the concentration, but you're always listening. You catch the compliments, the worries they share, the quick life stories they tell while you cut. One woman told you about a fiancé who drowned at sea. She asked if you could make his likeness from just her description. You tried. She cried. You've cut portraits of kids, soldiers, street sellers, actors, and once, a little dog. Some folks call silhouettes cheap pictures, but you understand better. They're instant heirlooms. By evening, your fingertips are stained dark from handling all that paper. You sit by the window in your small rented room, candlelight dancing, and look through what you made that day. Some were done for paying customers, others you created from memory after someone interesting walked past your booth. You call these your phantom cuts. Faces that stayed with you, shapes that remained in your thoughts long after the person left. You pin the best ones to the wall temporarily, watching your private gallery expand. A young chimney boy with a tilted cap, a widow with a pointed nose, a laughing girl with hair like waves. They feel like company, though they never make a sound. Sometimes a person comes back days later, holding their silhouette like it's solid evidence they're real. One man told you he used it in his marriage proposal. A child put hers in a frame for a school contest. And an old gentleman with a stiff collar once returned, clutching his cutout like treasure. "She's gone now," he said quietly, "but I've still got this piece of her. Thank you." You just nodded. There was nothing more to say. You've never had a fixed location. Your station is wherever the light works best, by fountains, under park shelters, in borrowed spaces. At street fairs, when rain starts, you pack your scissors away and wait under canopies, silently watching the umbrellas drift like dark beetles. Every now and then, someone passes and sneers. "What good is paper art?" they mutter. "It's just a passing fad." You don't respond. You just keep cutting. Because you know better than most. Shadows can sometimes tell more than real faces. There's a particular kind of strength in a side view. It hides almost every emotion, yet it shows just enough to count. A firm jaw, a slanting nose, a steady mouth. You've learned to see people not by what they openly present, but by what they reveal when they think nobody's looking. And isn't that the city itself? So much stays hidden. So much gets only hinted at. You end your day with one last cut, your own silhouette. You've made it 100 times, and each is different. Some days the edges are soft, others are sharp and clean. You pin it on the wall next to the rest, not from pride, but as a note to yourself. Even people who stay in the shadows deserve to be seen. The shell fragment feels smooth against your thumb, textured with lines and simple. But with your precise tools ready and your attention focused, you start the work of change. You're a cameo carver, and this thin piece of sea creature will soon become a treasured object for someone. The material you use isn't just any shell. It's usually the helmet shell, or a kind of striped shell prized for its natural colour bands. Pale white over burnt orange or cream over dark brown. These colour bands matter because your specific craft involves cutting into layers, where each careful stroke removes darkness to reveal lightness underneath. You sit by a window to catch the best light, with a magnifying lens over one eye, the air around you faintly tinged with vinegar and wax. It takes many hours to finish a single cameo, and most of that time is spent hunched over, perfectly motionless, breathing as carefully as if your own chest might crack the shell. The client, usually a woman of wealth, brings either a small drawing, a miniature portrait, or just a verbal description. "My daughter just turned 16. She has kind eyes and always wears her hair braided over her left shoulder." From those words you start, first the rough outline, then the elegant curve of the neck. The rising line of the forehead, the soft bend of the lips frozen in quiet dignity. You carve upward, always moving toward the point of brightest light, so the figure rises from the shell like a pale ghost. In Victorian England, cameos are more than decoration. They represent memory, status, and grief, all held in a tiny frame. A young bride might wear her mother's cameo. A widow might commission her late husband's profile to keep near her heart. You've carved ancient Greek goddesses, idealized anonymous faces, and even Queen Victoria herself, though always from a copied likeness, never from life. The most moving commissions, though, are the images of ordinary life. A midwife's dead husband, a child taken by sudden fever, a father remembered in his younger days, and, of course, sweethearts. So many lovers. Each tiny lock of hair, each gentle curve of the nose, each delicate lace neckline is painstakingly carved in shallow depth. The finished piece speaks not just of appearance but of deep emotion. At day's end, you store your unfinished work in velvet-lined drawers, being extremely careful not to damage the polished surface. A single careless touch can destroy days of dedicated effort. You've heard of other carvers hurling finished cameos into fires over one nicked eyelash or a slightly crooked cheek, but you've also watched women cry when they finally receive the completed piece. There's a particular moment, a hush, when they turn it slowly in the light, seeing the face of someone beloved emerging faintly from the shell, as if time itself had briefly stopped. That moment is what you really carve for. Of course, the basic tools are never sufficient alone. You use steel cutting tools, thin needles, and scrapers. But your real tools are your lasting patience, your ability to remember, and your quiet understanding of light itself. A well-carved cameo doesn't just display a face, it seems to gently glow. You've taken orders from every social level. Once, a duchess gave you a small silk ribbon and asked if you could capture the exact way her brother wore it in his military photograph. Another time, a coal dealer's wife paid you in small installments for a cameo of her child who died young. You carved a single daisy in the background because, she said, he always gathered them for her. Your studio isn't impressive. It's a modest room, a scratched wooden bench, the fine shell powder collecting in a small bowl. But here, in this simple space, beauty is quietly drawn out from the depths of the sea. You've heard talk of factories trying to mass-produce cameos with machines. They're lifeless copies, everyone the same. But your clients always come back eventually. The machine-made ones are too shallow, they say, too without soul. Because what you offer isn't just a product, it's a fragment of memory. Sometimes you catch yourself quietly humming while you work. Old church songs, street tunes from your childhood, or sometimes nothing at all, just the rhythm of your breathing and the soft scratching of the shell under the steel tip. It's a meditative practice, calming, almost healing. You've never made a cameo of your own face. It seems too vain, too strange. But maybe one day someone else will ask for it. A young apprentice, maybe, or a niece who recalls that your hands always smelled faintly of vinegar and powder, and if they carve your face with the same careful precision, you hope they capture the small imperfections, the slight tilt of your mouth, the mark where your glasses sat, and the faintest trace of real contentment at the edge of your lip, because above all else, your cameos have always been honest, gently, quietly, and always in profile. The heat lifts in wavering lines off the stone pavement as you roll your small cart into position. It's high summer in the city, what the newspapers are calling a scorching day, and kids are already racing through the streets with messy hands and flushed faces. You're a penny-lick seller, and today looks to be remarkably good for business. Your equipment is basic and essential. A large tin container filled with fresh hand-churned ice cream, a long-handled serving spoon and a stack of heavy glass cups. They're weighted at the base and have a shallow dip at the top just big enough for one or two quick licks. It doesn't look like much of a treat, but for most folks it's a small, cold pleasure that instantly cools the mouth and lifts the whole mood. You announce your flavours: vanilla, lemon. Just 1 penny. Mothers clutching their market bags stop. Young chimney boys throw down their caps and run over. A gentleman even tips his hat, handing you a coin for his daughter in lace gloves. You scoop the ice cream, drop a spoonful in the glass, and pass it over gently. The child licks eagerly, and when they're done, they hand back the cup, and you wipe it quickly with a damp rag before giving it to the next customer in line. Yes, it's not the cleanest practice, but this is the 1880s, and nobody questions the penny lick except perhaps the public health officials. They've lately begun to raise concerns about hygiene. One printed article falsely blamed penny licks for spreading contagious disease. Another called them dangerous spreaders of infection. You catch whispers of a potential ban, but for now, the law stays quiet, and the length of your line shows that nobody's too worried. You keep shifting between locations, through the public squares, the busy markets, and along the major bridges. In this intense heat, the ice cream begins to soften fast. But that, strangely, is good for sales. Better eat quick, you tell the customers. It won't hold in this weather. Kids pull on their mother's skirts, begging for a taste. You serve 20 portions in rapid sequence before you even stop to catch your breath. As the sun climbs highest, your pace picks up. Scoop, wipe, repeat the cycle. The glass gets slippery in your grip, and your cleaning rag is soaked through by midday. You sometimes swap it for a fresh one hidden in your apron. But let's be honest, by day's end, every penny-lick cup has touched dozens of tongues. You don't think about it, and neither do your buyers. For them, it's the pure enjoyment that counts most. The bright, sudden cold of the lemon, the rich, lingering melt of the vanilla, the occasional lucky taste of strawberry, if they're fortunate. Ice cream isn't just a sweet snack, it's a real wonder. It's cold, sweet, and strangely exotic. Picture tasting winter right in the middle of summer. Of course, you hear the swirling gossip. Certain vendors bypass the cleaning step between each customer. They recklessly reuse portions that have already started melting. One solitary penny lick could become the last taste you'll ever know. You just move your head side to side. It's merely a small serving of icy treat, not a fatal disease. Still, the world is definitely shifting. You've started seeing wrapped cones being sold by the Italian merchants. No communal glass, no damp cloth, no waiting to return the container. The wealthy patrons favour them. They're cleaner, more refined. You're not completely sure about this new development. Part of you ridicules the transformation, yet another part recognises deep down that your days in this trade are truly numbered. The penny lick will eventually become history. But right now, you still have your faithful, returning customers. The young kid with the scuffed leather shoes who always wants just the outer rim of the glass. The lady who insists that the citrus variety cures all her migraines. The young lovers who intentionally split a single serving and turn red every single time they attempt it. You'll keep pushing your cart forward as long as the sunshine stays burning bright. And maybe, someday, somebody will remember you. Not your actual name, but the feeling of a clear glass heated by their very hand, and the lovely temporary taste of something frozen and instantly vanished from their mouth. Something remarkably simple, something universally shared, something that, for the price of a single copper piece, transformed a wild, crowded city into a brief, perfect moment of pure magic. And currently, as the electric lamps start to dim across the stone-paved streets of your imagination, you feel the entire weight of the day descending like a delicate powder on an aged textile. You've walked through the cramped corridors of candlelight and intricate needle work, heard the far-off crisp sound of shears and the tender, smooth stroke of a quality brush on a privacy panel. You've enjoyed the smallest serving of citrus ice from a communal cup, rotated tiny pendants over in the hollow of your palm, and observed a flawless portrait emerge in coal-black paper like a delicate, weightless murmur resonating from the distant past. Victorian Britain was a world of more than simply thunder in trains and endless grime. It was a domain of particular, silent professions and strange, careful hands. The overlooked, the completely vanished people. People who meticulously etched out their entire livelihood on shells and within the darkness. People who chimed little bells, transported glass vessels and untold stories, and peddled sheet music on crowded street corners. You won't discover them recorded in the primary history books, or commemorated in massive stone monuments. But tonight they've discovered a lasting place in your very memory. So draw one final long breath through that gaslit pane. Listen for the tender, delicate scrape of chalk on a stone surface. The sound of a marionette performance being carefully stored away for the night. the soft, downy silence of a brush dusting a plush stage drape. It's all gradually fading now, like the closing, lingering tones from a small music box. You feel comfortable, you are safe, and your extended imaginary voyage for tonight is ultimately complete.